Hey there! Are you rewatching all of Loki Season 1 before Season 2 premieres? We've got you covered. Take a look back at our sacred timeline with our breakdown of every episode of Loki Season 1. Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 1. It is Wednesday, my dudes, but not just any Wednesday. This is the official start of Loki Wednesdays, wherein Marvel's God of Mischief graces our television screens with a brand new 6-episode Disney Plus series full of time travel, multiversal mayhem, glorious purpose, and people saying the word variant so much it's gonna cease to have meaning for the following 3 business days. The series premiere sets the stakes with a journey into the heart of the Time Variance Authority and gives us a glimpse at this Loki's past, present, and future. And with the future of the MCU at stake, this show could have major ramifications for not just the God of Mischief, but for Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Ant-Man Quantumania, and the rest of Phase 4 as we know it. Now, we're going to be going through this episode with a fine-toothed comb so we can break down all the many Easter eggs, connections, and hidden details that you might have missed. As always, if you prefer to read all about it, Rosie Knight has you covered over on Nerdist.com. However, in order to talk about it, we obviously need to spoil what happens in Episode 1. So if you haven't seen the series premiere of Loki yet, find the nearest portal on out of here. Alright, let's get into it, shall we? So the series begins exactly where we last left our hero. Okay, fair. I meant the 2012 Avengers variant Loki who escaped with the Tesseract during the Avengers' botched time heist in Avengers Endgame. We now know that Loki made his triumphant escape, and then immediately fell face first into the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and he tries to use his iconic line from Avengers.
And I am burdened with glorious purpose.
Sadly, the locals aren't having it, and Loki gets immediately busted by the agents of the Time Variance Authority who appear on the scene through a portal known as a Time Door. Created by the Timekeepers, or the Space Lizards as Loki likes to call them, the TVA first appeared in 1986's Thor 371. They're the bureaucratic law enforcement agency that protects the sacred timeline from potential alternate realities, like the kind that Loki inadvertently created by teleporting out of custody during this version of the Battle of New York in Avengers Endgame. As we'll see later in this episode, the TVA is rigidly divided into distinct classes of employees. Analysts like Mobius, played by Owen Wilson, who manage drones called chronomonitors in the comics that keep an eye on specific timelines, and hunters like B-15, played by Wunmi Mosaku, who are elite troops that lead the TVA foot soldiers called Minutemen. Now, fun fact, in the comics, the Minutemen are a separate group of time cops created by Walt Simonson, who first appeared in 1991's Fantastic Four 352, but here, they're one big happy time family. Anyways, back in Mongolia, B-15 explains to this variant Loki that he committed a standard sequence violation, noting that this timeline is growing at a stable rate and slope. So essentially, Loki's actions created a branching timeline, but the TVA arrived on the scene before it could spiral out of control. And while the prime Loki on the main timeline died during Avengers Infinity War, this 2012 Avengers Loki is a variant, which is also funny to anyone that collects comics because they frequently have variant covers that are essentially different versions of the same thing. And the same principle applies here, which in turn suggests the existence of embossed Loki, hologram Loki, and worst of all, polybagged Loki. Yuck. In a blink and you'll miss it moment, B-15's time monitor device displays the number 4.01, which is a fitting double entendre, April Fools for the God of Mischief, and Thor number 401 that features a wager between Thor and Loki 1,000 years in the past. And as we learn later in the episode, the last time Loki lost a bet to Thor, he had to go commit sky crime as DB Cooper, but more on that in just a little bit. Anyway, the TVA covers their tracks using a grenade-like device called a reset charge, which destroys the affected branch timeline and eliminates any evidence that could be used to create further temporal anomalies. It's just one of the TVA's many time-based tools they use to control unruly subjects and clean up messes. For example, Loki learns firsthand that even worse than falling for 30 minutes is getting smacked so hard you move at 1/16th speed. In the lobby of the TVA, after a variant scroll is processed, we learn the collar around Loki's neck can be controlled by this small clicker device called a time twister in a clever nod to the Timekeepers comic book origins. It lets you essentially rewind a person on their personal timeline, making escape attempts futile. And equally futile is trying to resist the inexorable bureaucracy of the Time Variance Authority, which uses lasers to blast off Loki's clothes, documents everything he's ever said ever, and gives Loki an existential crisis about whether or not he's secretly a robot.
What if I was a robot and I didn't know it?
Thankfully, the adorable anthropomorphic clock Miss Minutes, voiced by the iconic Tara Strong, is here to explain exactly what's going on. In an animated sequence influenced by vintage 1950s safety PSAs, Miss Minutes explains that long ago a multiversal war took place in which timelines battled each other for supremacy, resulting in the destruction of, well, everything. And this is basically what happens in the lead up to the 2015 Secret Wars event series in the comics, wherein multiple timelines converge on each other, destroying each other in the process, until the end result is this messed up nightmare planet called Battle World, where only these fragmented versions of heroes from across the multiverse and a God King Doctor Doom remained. It's worth noting that Secret Wars is the one storyline that the Russo brothers said they would return for, and it feels like a fantastic way to eventually cap off this multiversal arc seeded by WandaVision and accelerated by Loki. In the comics, the Timekeepers were originally the villainous Time Twisters, created by He Who Remained, the final director of the Time Variance Authority before his universe died. It's a complicated saga involving time travel and Nexus beings, and some connections to WandaVision source material, but that is a story for another video. In Loki, for the time being, this propaganda film explains the Timekeepers emerged, they reorganized the multiverse into a single sacred timeline, but remember, this is their version of events. And although I'm sure you're preemptively rolling your eyes at the mention of the X-Men in any MCU-related video, the sacred timeline has appeared before in X-Men comics. Tanya Trask, the mutant daughter of Sentinels creator Bolivar Trask, is a time-traveling telepath known as Madame Sanctity, the guardian of the sacred timeline. During the dark apocalypse-dominated future, she became a high priestess in Clan Ascani, which prized preserving and nurturing the sacred timeline through targeted time travel and pruning like we see the TVA doing in Loki. So, not saying, just saying. Snicked. Anyway, the TVA takes their timeline just as seriously, vaporizing you on the spot if you don't have your ticket. Now, another fun detail in the background is the clock on the wall with multiple hour and minute hands, giving the sense that while time is the priority here, it does not function normally.
I don't know, it's hard to say. Time passes differently here in the TVA.
After the title sequence, we see Owen Wilson as Mobius M. Mobius investigating a time crime in Aix-en-Provence, France, circa 1549. Created by Walt Simonson, this character first appeared in 1991's Fantastic Four Annual number 24, and it's revealed that each of these cloned TVA managers are based on longtime Marvel writer Mark Gruenwald and later Tom DeFalco. The most famous example is Mobius, who is definitely a Gruenwald clone, even if Owen Wilson is not. Wow. Now someone, or some Loki as we'll come to learn, has been repeatedly ambushing TVA forces while they're responding to routine Nexus events, the TVA's term for the inciting incident of a new branching timeline. And if you recall in WandaVision Episode 7, Nexus was the name of a unique antidepressant that works to anchor you back to your reality, or the reality of your choice. It was featured in one of those fake commercials. The term Nexus and Nexus beings first came into the Marvel Universe thanks to The Watcher in What If number 35. Nexus beings are described as rare individual entities with the ability to affect probability and thus the future, thereby altering the flow of the universal time stream. These beings, each referred to as a nexus, act as the keystones of the multiverse and are crucial to its ultimate coherence and stability. As alluded to earlier in this video, the Timekeepers, Wanda Maximoff, and yes, Kang the Conqueror are all tied together through multiversal shenanigans and Nexus beings. But if you want to know more about that, I'll put a link for you in the description below. More concerning is that this mystery assailant is very meticulous about stealing the reset charges that TVA agents use to undo the temporal damage that has been done to a particular timeline. Luckily for them, they have a witness, a French peasant child that interrupts their investigation. Mobius asks the kid who did it, and they respond by pointing to a stained glass image of a red-faced devil sitting on a golden throne. And obviously, I want to say that's Mephisto, but that theory has already been squashed by director Kate Herron, speaking with Entertainment Tonight. So, not today, Marvel's version of Satan, or tomorrow, or for the next 5 weeks at least. Maybe week 7. Fortunately, this kiddo has a clue, a pack of Kablooey brand blueberry-flavored candy that looks like it came from a modern convenience store. Unfortunately, this timeline is approaching a red line, probably the point where it's going to collapse in on itself, or it's going to be past the point of an easy fix. But before Mobius can flee the scene, another TVA agent steps through a time door to reveal they've apprehended Loki Laufeyson, aka Variant L1130, aka our anti-hero. This file also confirmed for the MCU something that has been canon for the comics for quite some time, that Loki is gender fluid. It's mentioned by Odin in Original Sin number 5, where the All-Father reveals to Thor and Loki they have a secret sister, Angela. He says, "My son and my daughter and my child who is both," the last of which is referring to Loki. Also in the file, we learn this Loki is from Sector 1900-2099, which could allude to the Marvel 2099 comics continuity set in a possible distant future of Marvel's main Earth 616 continuity. And we did get a Marvel 2099 Easter egg in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and there was a super creepy 2099 version of Loki, so anything is possible. But with that said, I really hope we don't meet that version of Loki because it's just gross. I hate looking at him. Get him out of here. Get out of here. Moving on, we see Loki escorted past murals of the TVA, including what might be a subtle nod to Stan Lee, and timekeepers pruning errant branches of the multiverse so Loki can stand trial before Judge Ravonna Renslayer, played by Gugu Mbatha Raw. She's sitting in front of elaborate sculptures of the three timekeepers who apparently have time for everything but modesty. I mean, these dudes are everywhere. In the comics, she's the daughter of King Corellius in the 40th century and lives in one of the last civilizations to be taken over by Kang the Conqueror, who ultimately spares Ravonna because he's in love with her. First appearing in Avengers 23, Ravonna winds up giving her life to save Kang the Conqueror, which later leads to Kang making this divergent reality so that he can save her life instead, something that is decidedly at odds with the TVA's mission statement. Her comic book counterpart wears armor that lets her disguise herself and alter her form at will, much like a certain Loki I could think of, but as for whether or not we'll see that or a connection to Kang remains to be seen. For now, though, she holds Loki's fate and a gavel in her hands, running the Time Variance Authority on the behalf of the never-seen but apparently statuesque Timekeepers, and Loki is guilty of the very serious infraction of Sequence Violation 7/2089, which obviously sounds like an important date in Marvel, or like someone's birthday, but as far as I can tell, the only multiversal implication would be What If Volume 2 Number 1 released on that day, about the Avengers losing a war to the High Evolutionary, who detonates a genetic bomb that turns mutants into these cosmically powerful beings who proceed to destroy the universe. Anyway, if you know what that date means, please let me know in the comments below, because my brain is basically pudding at this point, in this timeline, in every other one too. Not helping Loki's case is the fact that he can't use his magic powers inside the TVA, but fortunately for the God of Mischief, Mobius wants to go full Mindhunter by using Loki's unique Loki perspective to track down the Loki variant out there who's murdering TVA agents left, right, and center. Now, quick side note, the logo of the Time Variance Authority on Judge Renslayer's stand is awesome. It's a sword and shield, an hourglass, and a face all in one, encompassing the entirety of the TVA's mission, the people who protect time itself. We also get a sense of how expansive the Time Variance Authority really is. Out the window of the hall, we see this sprawling, futuristic cityscape complete with massive statuary of the Timekeepers yet again, holding aloft a constantly updating ticker of the sacred timeline like the New York Stock Exchange, except in this universe, who knows what's spiking? Is AMC on the moon, or is it Captain America? Only time will tell. Inside the Time Theater, Mobius drinks Josta Soda, a discontinued energy drink from the mid-90s produced by Pepsi, because of course time works differently in the TVA. I'm sure they have a vending machine full of like Citra and Pepsi Jazz and Hubba Bubba Soda somewhere. Anyway, Mobius turns on his holo projector to take Loki on a tour down memory lane, as well as offer a peek into the future that we know of, giving him glimpses of the Avengers taking him down, Phil Coulson dying, and Beth the waitress looking on in abject horror. We also see in detail how Loki pulled off one of the most iconic unsolved mysteries in history, the skyjacking of a Boeing 727 by D.B. Cooper, who collected $200,000 in ransom, jumped out of the plane, and then disappeared, leaving behind only scattered banknotes. As it turns out, Loki did this because he lost a bet to his brother Thor, using the Bifrost to vanish into thin air. And for more on the real-life mystery of D.B. Cooper, we have an article for you over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. What really crushes Loki's spirit, though, is seeing how his actions lead to the death of his adoptive mother Frigga and Thor the Dark World. Now, unfortunately, Loki isn't quite in the mood for introspection, so he escapes with the Time Twister to try and recover the Tesseract from Casey, the front desk clerk played by the hilarious Eugene Cordero. He took the errant Infinity Stone for processing, and although he knows what's efficient, he doesn't know what a fish is.
Give me the Tesseract or I'll gut you like a fish, Casey.
What's a fish?
Inside Casey's desk are countless Infinity Stones from different timelines, what appears to be a French Medal of Honor, and what I'm going to insist is Dominic Toretto's cross and nothing related to Blade. Also, there's a Honus Wagner baseball card, the most valuable and expensive baseball card in the world. But apparently none of those Infinity Stones actually work inside the TVA, hence why they use them as paperweights instead. And that's a humbling realization for Loki, who learned the greatest power in his universe, one we know can be used to snap half of all life out of existence, is worthless inside the TVA's confines. Back in the Time Theater, Loki watches more iconic moments from his MCU journey, including Odin's death in Thor Ragnarok, fighting Hela alongside Thor, the climactic battle of Asgard in Thor Ragnarok, and his tragic death in Avengers Infinity War at the purple sausage fingers of Thanos. And the end of the film running pass reads ETH 616, which seems like a quick nod to Earth 616, the Marvel Universe's primary comic book continuity. Loki's pity party is cut short, though, by a fight with B-15, in which the God of Mischief does his most mischievous thing yet. He constantly rewinds her using the Time Twister until she disappears further back into her personal timeline. After that, we learn that Loki doesn't actually like to hurt people. He does it as part of a desperate play to take control and harness order in a world full of chaos. But there's no more time for self-reflection, because to catch a Loki, you need a Loki apparently, because otherwise you're shit out of Loki. I said. Next up, we see the evil Loki variant set an elaborate trap for a group of hunters and Minutemen in the oil fields of Salina, Oklahoma, circa 1858. Interestingly enough, another Oklahoma town, Broxton, played a major part in Thor and Loki's stories in the comics. After the events of Ragnarok in the comics, Thor rebuilt Asgard on Earth just outside of Broxton, Oklahoma, much like Valkyrie and the others did with New Asgard in Norway in Avengers Endgame. Here, though, Oklahoma is only bad news bears for the members of the TVA, who soon find themselves extremely on fire. They scan the high-tech time shovel and diagnose its temporal signature as being from the early 3rd millennium. And who, pray tell, is a major fixture in Marvel lore from the 31st century that's about to become a Jonathan Majors fixture in the MCU? That's right, ya boy Nathaniel Richards, who eventually becomes Kang the Conqueror, and is going to appear next in Ant-Man Quantumania. So Kang Watch is in full effect, people. There may be no Mephisto, but who knows, we could see a Kang. While this Loki variant is committing time crimes and has their own motive, they could potentially be working in cahoots with someone like Kang as part of their master plan. As always, only time and branching timelines will tell. But I digress. There are several fun Easter eggs and references during the end credits, things like Schrodinger's equation, forms to fill out for reports on apocalyptic events like the Battle of New York, maps of the multiverse, infinity stones being used as paperweights, and literature on what to do when you're a variant. In addition, the special thanks section of the credits includes shoutouts to a number of comic creators like Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby for creating Loki, Fear itself and Journey into Mystery writer Kieran Gillen and artist Doug Braithwaite, who chronicled the adventures of Kid Loki, who will reportedly appear in this series, TVA co-creators Walt Simonson and Sal Buscema, Loki Agent of Asgard writer Al Ewing and artist Lee Garbett, Ravonna Renslayer co-creator and all-around Marvel icon Don Heck, and co-creators of the Timekeepers Mark Gruenwald, Ralph Macchio, and Keith Pollard. And that is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 1. It was an awesome introduction to this time-traveling series and the bureaucratic nightmare that is the TVA. And we have plenty of theories and questions to tide us over until next week's episode, which you can peruse in the meantime over on Nerdist.com. But for now, tell us, what did you think about the Loki premiere? What do you think the Loki variant is really after, and why? And did you spot anything that we missed?
How do you not know what a fish is?
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com. Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 2. Oh, what a marvelous day, Loki fans, because after introducing us to the multiversal bureaucracy of the Time Variance Authority last week, Loki Episode 2 finds us hot on the trail of Loki's greatest opponent to date, another Loki.
They're the lesser kind, to be clear.
With time-traveling mysteries to solve, plots within plots, and deep-cut Marvel lore to unravel, there's a metric ton of stuff for us to break down. Shh. Now we're going to go through all of it with a fine-tooth comb, put everything under the microscope to find all those Easter eggs, connections, and other details that you might have missed. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, Rosie Knight has you covered over on Nerdist.com. However, in order to talk about this episode, we obviously need to spoil what happens. So if you haven't seen Episode 2, The Variant, yet, well, leave now before you blow your lid.
Right on cue! Nothing matters!
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? So the episode begins in medieval times, and no, not the era or even the restaurant, but the best approximation that Oshkosh, Wisconsin can offer in 1985, a Renaissance fair. And like that one Star Trek cosplayer, your local Ren Fair, the TVA agents look incredibly anachronistic, much to the chagrin of Kate Berlant's character.
What's going on? You guys aren't dressed right.
But they don't care, because they're hot on the trail of the Loki variant, the one who's been attacking TVA hunters and Minutemen and stealing their reset charges. And as for Oshkosh, the setting itself is actually a bit of an Easter egg. It's the hometown of the Time Variance Authority co-creator Mark Gruenwald, who's also the mustachioed Mobius inspiration. He was a longtime writer and editor for Marvel Comics. And in the comics, it also appeared in 1989's Quasar #1, written by Mark Gruenwald. So who knows, maybe at some point we'll see Wendell Vaughn, aka Quasar himself, show up elsewhere in the multiverse, or maybe even in the hallowed halls of the Time Variance Authority. And while this is likely a coincidence, it bears mentioning that Mark Millar and Tommy Lee Edwards created a comic called Marvel 1985 back in 2008. It was a multiversal story about a young boy in our world who discovers the villains from the Marvel Comics universe are trying to take over the real world. But then again, as we'll see by the end of this episode, the fabric of the multiverse as we know it could be in imminent danger. And speaking of imminent danger, the Time Variance Authority doesn't even realize they've walked into yet another trap. Using mind control to turn Sasha Lane's Hunter C20 into her puppet, the variant Loki, appropriately enough, goes medieval on their asses and beats them to a pulp to the tune of Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero, which is having quite a moment, thanks to recent features in Masters of the Universe Revelations trailer, and the Guardians of the Galaxy E3 trailer, and of course, its immortal appearance in Shrek 2. After killing the Minutemen, the evil Loki variant kidnaps C20, taking a bunch of reset charges, and escapes using a TVA-issued handheld device to use a time door and lets them do things like access missed minutes. And as much as I want to believe that date, April 12th, 1985 in the lower left, is a reference to Marvel Superhero Secret Wars number 12, which released in April 1985, much more fascinating is that the opposite date is actually when the Loki variant was in Aix-en-Provence, France on December 4th, 12/4. Now back at the TVA, we see Loki reading a copy of Mobius's jet ski-themed Wake magazine while ignoring an augmented reality version of Miss Minutes. And if there's any justice in this world, this means we'll get an eventual homage to the most iconic jet ski in Marvel Comics history from the cover of Punisher War Journal number 19. Instead, we get confirmation that a red line means the TVA can no longer reset a Nexus event to fix a branch timeline. That would in turn lead to the destruction of both the timeline itself and reality as we know it, presumably because it would start the creation of a new multiverse. So RIP Sacred Timeline, but good thing that definitely won't happen by the end of this episode. Wink. More troubling is the revelation that Miss Minutes is equal parts recording and living being somehow.
Sort of both.
She leaps back into the vintage Lear Siegler computer on Mobius's desk, but they both have bigger fish to fry. Loki is given a TVA jacket and brought to Oshkosh to help Mobius and B-15 investigate the scene of the crime. And while they clown on the God of Mischief, we run through a variety of Loki variants, all of which the TVA has apparently pruned more of than nearly any other kind of variant, because Loki gonna Loki. Our hero is Loki variant L1130. The first one we see, L6792, has blue skin because Loki's biological father is Laufey, ruler of the Frost Giants in Jotunheim, as we learn in Thor. Next is L1247, who apparently won the Tour de France and is holding the Coupe Omnisports, which may or may not be the one that was stolen from Geraint Thomas in 2017. Next, we get a towering beef castle version of Loki that kind of looks like if Loki were the Hulk, followed by what Loki would look like as Trevor Slattery, and last but not least, a Loki inspired by the Viking Age concept art created by longtime Thor artist Russell Dauterman. And while this is happening, we get clarification about Loki's general powers, that he's able to shapeshift and project illusion.
Duplication casting.
Sorry, he's capable of duplication casting, an ability that lets him recreate an exact facsimile of one's body in its present circumstance, which acts as a true holographic mirror of its molecular structure. All of which is to say, Loki is real handsome at making incredibly detailed holographic duplicates that are accurate to the atomic level. Of course, as we'll see later in this episode, your powers may vary from Loki to Loki.
The hell was that?
That was me.
To help keep this newly minted Professor Loki motivated, Mobius dangles the carrot of a private audience with the Timekeepers, which is exactly what Loki was denied by Judge Renslayer during his trial. Now, this week's episode is very much an expanded FAQ about how time travel works in the Marvel Universe, including what you can and cannot do. For example, Nexus events actively change and alter a timeline. That means you can only access that timeline, which is changing, in real time rather than arrive before a Nexus event takes place. That means Avengers Endgame, not a Nexus event, because it was supposed to happen.
What they did was supposed to happen.
Additionally, we learn that reset charges only prune the affected radius of a branch timeline rather than completely destroying it. At least that's what the TVA propaganda wants us to think, and that's precisely the problem, because the TVA doesn't think like Loki. At least that's what Loki wants them to think. It's all a big game of cat and mouse, each is trying to outmanipulate the other. Frankly, a little exhausting, but very fun to watch. Anyway, as the reset charge destroys all the Nexus event-related material from the timeline, we see a visualization of this timeline being erased. Back in the TVA, we see some familiar location names too, like Nidavellir, where Eitri helped Thor forge Stormbreaker, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where we just were, and Sakaar, the artificial trash planet previously ruled over by the Grandmaster in Thor Ragnarok. In Judge Ravonna Renslayer's office, we get a glimpse of her trophy case where she keeps trinkets and items from previous missions pulled off by analysts like Mobius. Ravonna's helmet in her trophy case is A23, a reference to her very first appearance in Avengers 23, and as for that roller skate, maybe that's from a variant Tony Stark, who in the comics infamously invented jet-powered roller skates once back in Tales of Suspense number 40. Now, the snow globe could be a clever allusion to the Tommy Westphall hypothesis, the idea that practically every TV show of the last 3 decades is part of the same universe. Now, this universe exists inside the head of Tommy Westphall from Saint Elsewhere, a medical drama that ends with the revelation that the series never actually happened. Rather, it was all inside the mind of a character that had a snow globe with the titular hospital inside of it. Now, Susanna Polo over at Polygon wrote a thorough deep dive into this particular rabbit hole, which I will link to in the description below, in case you want to feel bigger Luke levels of crazed. But the multiversal implications, especially for a show like Loki, are just too fun to pass up. Now, in the background, we also see 3 gigantic, hyper-detailed statues of the Timekeepers whom Mobius has apparently never actually met despite their omnipresent statuary. Apparently, they're keeping a keen eye on this case according to Ravonna, which is why she decides to record this meeting. However, her actions and evasive language have us wondering if she's telling the truth about the Timekeepers, if they really do exist, or if she's just covering for whomever's actually pulling the strings behind this operation. During this scene, we also see a Franklin D. Roosevelt High School pen, which is the name of several real-life high schools, but to me seems like a subtle way to acknowledge the influence of the Tennessee Valley Authority on the Time Variance Authority. The real TVA was an agency created in 1933 to provide utilities like electricity and assist with economic development in the Tennessee Valley during the Great Depression. It was created as part of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, and many of its early aesthetics, including its Electricity for All logo and other advertisements and pamphlets, visually inform the look of the Time Variance Authority as it appears in Loki. Plus, it's right there. They're both the TVA. At least that's my theory, but if you have a better one, please let me know in the comments below. But for now, we're moving on. Then we get another glimpse of the scale of the Time Variance Authority's main office, which is filmed in the lobby of Atlanta's Marriott Marquis Hotel, but sadly, neither those Timekeeper statues nor those endless arrays of bookshelves are there in real life. Moving on, behind Loki's desk is the number 372, a reference to Thor 372, which tells the origin story of the Time Variance Authority. As Loki approaches the desk to retrieve files, we hear a subtle musical reference to the movie Seven, which is apparently an influence on the series, according to series director Kate Herron. Now you can hear the sweet strains of Johann Sebastian Bach's Suite No. 3 in D major, which appears in both Loki and Seven. And when Loki retrieves the files that aren't classified to him, we see SYF and LK3 in the background that correspond to those buttons on the mysterious elevator Loki rides with Mobius in episode 1. And while Loki glumly thumbs through paperwork, one item does catch his eye, an event inquiry into the destruction of Asgard during Thor Ragnarok, which was a Class 7 apocalypse involving total planetary destruction and killing 9,719 people, almost the entirety of Asgard's civilization. There's also a reference to the Revengers, the name given to Hulk, Thor, Loki, and Valkyrie in Thor Ragnarok, as they fight to escape Sakaar and defeat Hela. Now, all of these events took place in Thor Ragnarok, something this Loki has never experienced, but fortunately it does give him a clue about what his counterpart is up to. Unfortunately for Mobius, Loki interrupts his 17 minutes allotted for lunch, and during this scene we learn the TVA seemingly has a soft spot for beverages of the 1990s of all shapes and sizes. Not only does Mobius glurp down yet another Josta soda, but this week we also see a Boku, a discontinued juice box marketed from 1990 to 2003. So who knows what's next? A Surge, an Orbit, a Mountain Dew Pitch Black? We'll just have to wait and see, but I'm pretty thirsty right now. Anyway, the more important point here is that the Loki variant is using apocalypses to mask their trail by hiding inside of apocalyptic events because they have the same effect as a reset charge. They ultimately erase the evidence because the timeline will still end per the apocalyptic event. Or as Loki so nihilistically puts it,
if everything and everyone around you is destined for imminent destruction, then nothing that I say or do will matter.
In order to test this theory, Loki and Mobius travel back to Pompeii in 79 AD, moments before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which killed thousands of people, covered the city in volcanic ash, and even turned one man's brain into glass, according to the BBC. As it turns out, Loki's theory is correct. Despite causing utter chaos in Pompeii, nothing they did caused even the slightest blip in the timeline because it was still wiped out by a natural disaster. Even more important, though, is the revelation that Mobius has never been able to ride a jet ski despite being low-key obsessed with them. And that means if this show does not end with these two tearing up some sick waves on a Sea-Doo, we are legally obliged to write Michael Waldron a sternly worded letter asking him to, I don't know, please include it in season 2 or something.
It'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
Now, during a debate about free will, order, and chaos, Mobius explains the Time Variance Authority's purpose is to help the Timekeepers prevent Nexus events while they untangle the epilogue of time itself. And when that's done, the TVA would theoretically cease to exist because there would be no more potential timelines to prune. Everything would unfold according to the Timekeeper's grand plan. Now, obviously, the Loki variant has other plans for the sacred timeline, but there's definitely something sinister about the Timekeeper's plan here, too. Trying to exert order over an inherently chaotic system like the universe is an impossible task. Trying to play God usually blows up in one's face, unless, of course, you're like an actual god like Loki, but no, even then, still blows up quite a lot. Thankfully, this debate leads to the revelation of Chekhov's gum from episode 1, Kablooey, the blueberry-flavored gum that the Loki variant gave to that French child back in episode 1. And as it turns out, this is a futuristic candy that hails from a very specific era, 2050, where a deadly Category 8 hurricane strikes a Roxcart store in Haven Hills, Alabama. Roxcart is a futuristic superstore run by Roxxon, the nefarious oil company in the Marvel Universe that first appeared in Captain America number 180. Now, before you ask, yes, the head of Roxxon, Dario Agger, is secretly a Minotaur that wants to conquer the 10 realms of Asgard because comics, and has a past with Loki having cut a deal with the god of mischief to murder Thor in exchange for a church built in Loki's name. Yes, that's all true. And Roxxon has also been referenced in all 3 Iron Man films and TV shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and Cloak and Dagger. However, if that alleged Agent Carter Easter egg from last week means what we think it means for the Marvel TV universe, then I wouldn't put too much stock in those latter appearances because we have a dark theory which I will link to in the description below. Mobius, the TVA agents, and Loki, sans his iconic twin daggers, make their way to this futuristic Roxcart store to track down the variant, only to split up Scooby-Doo style when we learn the variant is watching them through security cameras because, of course. Loki and B-15 make their way through the store, and the Loki variant mind controls a series of customers, including B-15, to taunt our god of mischief. Now, these two Lokis feel each other out, and our Loki tries to cut a deal with this variant Loki. Now, the variant actually objects to being called Loki, which is interesting. Might be a clue that's actually another Asgardian menace like Enchantress, who has similar green mind control powers in the comics. Or maybe it's just an actual Loki variant, and we are way overthinking this, but that doesn't sound like us. Meanwhile, in the office, Mobius and co find Hunter C-20, who's muttering, "It's real, it's real, it's real" to herself on the floor. And what exactly is real? Well, based on what we'll soon see from this Loki variant, the multiverse itself. C-20 apparently snitched and told the Loki variant where exactly the Timekeepers are and how to find them, which is bad news bears indeed for those space lizards because there's a number of reset chargers that are wired to explode in short order. And from there, things take a turn for the Equalizer as Loki battles these mind-controlled meat puppets of the variant until at long last the variant herself steps out from the shadows, revealing herself to be, presumably, Lady Loki, as played by Sophia DiMartino. She's wearing a horned headpiece that bears a striking resemblance to that stained glass image of the devil from 16th century France. First introduced by J. Michael Straczynski and Olivier Coipel in 2008, Lady Loki appeared for several years in the comics until we learn in 2014's original sin, Thor and Loki, the 10th Realm storyline, Lady Loki is one of several versions of Loki that exist inside the God of Mischief as we know them, alongside others like Kid Loki. Both J. Michael Straczynski and Olivier Coipel are thanked in the end credits as well, which is yet another nod to this actually being Lady Loki. Now, that original Sin storyline was also the story arc that canonically confirmed Loki's gender fluid status, much like the MCU officially did last week in Loki Episode 1. However, this Loki variant's objection to being called Loki at all, and the fact that she's listed as Sylvie in the Castilian Spanish credits, has us wondering if this could maybe be a version of another green-clad Thor villain, the Enchantress, aka Sylvie Lushton. Now, only time will tell, but it's a fascinating wrinkle nonetheless. Anyway, moving on. Using stolen TVA technology, the variant has jury-rigged a bunch of reset charges together to essentially send bombs through time doors to dozens of different timelines across the universe. The time bombs immediately create dozens of branch timelines, which in turn will redline and thereby create the multiverse. And considering we know Doctor Strange is heading into the multiverse of madness, something tells me this is not going to get neatly resolved by episode 6. In the TVA, we see the Sacred Timeline Monitor going absolutely bonkers, which includes quantum coordinates for Niflheim, one of the 9 realms of Norse mythology and the location of Hell, as well as Dartford, England, which is best known for being the hometown of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Now, in my heart of hearts, I sincerely hope this is a reference to the What If Volume 2 number 41 story, what if the Fantastic Four was led by Keith Richards instead of Reed Richards, which is exactly what it sounds like. But I digress. The situation quickly goes from bad to worse as the Sacred Timeline redlines all over the place, creating branch timelines in the following eras and areas. The first is Phong Nha, Vietnam on August 3rd, 1522, the location of a famous network of caves in Vietnam whose name roughly translates to wind and teeth. Next up, there's Lisbon, Portugal on March 31st, 1492, and that day in history is infamous for the signing of the Alhambra Decree, which expelled Jews from Spain, many of whom fled to Portugal to escape persecution. Then there's Vormir on April 23rd, 2301, and you may recall Vormir is the planet where Red Skull serves as a creepy tour guide to the cliff where one can get the Soul Stone by sacrificing something near and dear like a Gamora or a Black Widow. And given that we know Infinity Stones are basically big goofy paperweights in the TVA, maybe this far-off world has other secrets yet to be discovered. After that, we have Thornton, USA on October 25th, 1551, which I have no clue about apart from the fact that it has Thor in the name, followed by Cookeville, USA on November 22nd, 1999. Now, this could maybe refer to Cookeville, Tennessee, a place where a treasure trove of rare comics were discovered dating back to the 1930s through the 1950s. Next up is Asgard on February 16th, 2004, and by now everybody knows that Asgard was the home of Thor and Loki, but it could also reference the young Thor comic Son of Asgard, which came out in 2004. Or maybe it's just a hint that Lady Loki's trying to mess up the status quo of past Asgard as we know it. Then we come to Rome on October 3rd, 1390, and in 1390 Pope Boniface IX held a jubilee, a year of remission of sins and universal pardon in Rome. So once again we see Lady Loki messing with an important moment in history. In the comics, Kang the Conqueror, for example, would regularly go back in time and set himself up to become this political power, so maybe this could be an example of that if they're in cahoots, or she could be trying to undo Kang's influence on history, which could explain why they're so eager to stop her if Kang is actually pulling the TVA's strings. After that, we come to Sakaar on August 13th, 1984, and this is the gladiatorial planet that we come to in Thor Ragnarok, which has a very 1980s feel to it, so probably just a nice reference there. Then we have Baricara, Colombia on February 2nd, 1808, which is a time of mounting resistance and unrest in response to Spanish colonial rule. After that is Porvoo, Finland on July 14th, 1708, the year that Russian forces invaded Finland and burned the Porvoo Cathedral to the ground. Next is Ego on December 27th, 1382, a nod to Ego the Living Planet, the horny celestial and all-around bad dad played by Kurt Russell in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Ego is admittedly millions of years old, so this date doesn't really matter, but its inclusion feels important with the Eternals on the horizon. After that, we have Titan on October 13th, 1982, which is the moon orbiting Saturn from which Thanos hails. As for that date, that was the year that Marvel published The Death of Captain Marvel, the publisher's very first graphic novel. Marvel spends his final days on Titan with Thanos' father mentor, his brother Star Fox, and a collection of Earth's greatest superheroes who sadly are unable to cure his cancer. So could Lady Loki maybe try to stop the death of Captain Marvel? Is she trying to take something from him like his negabands? We'll just have to wait and see. Moving on, we have New York on September 21st, 1947, which immediately calls to mind Agent Carter, and eagle-eyed fans already spotted someone that looks an awful lot like Peggy Carter being taken through a time door in the TVA, and the fan-fave pre-Disney Plus show had a lot of New York City action in 1946 before moving to LA in 1947. So maybe Lady Loki didn't care for season 2 and she's trying to change the setting of the show, but probably not. After that, we see Tokyo, Japan on March 1st, 1984, where presumably Lady Loki just wanted to go see an early screening of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, which, great movie. Following that is Hala on January 3rd, 0051, which is the home planet of the Kree, but we don't know the relevance of the date here, so we're going to guess it's related to the Kree Skrull War. After that is Kingsport, a real Tennessee town, and a fictional Massachusetts town created by H.P. Lovecraft in his 1921 short story, The Terrible Old Man, which appeared once in Marvel's Tower of Shadows #3. Next is Xandar on September 24th, 1001, and Xandar is the homeworld of the Nova Corps, which we first saw in Guardians of the Galaxy. They were at war with the Kree and Hala for thousands of years, so maybe this is connected to that conflict. After that is Beijing, China on November 23rd, 2005, and in certain Marvel Comics stories, there's a version of Beijing that holds the gate to the 8th city, a mystical portal to a prison realm for evil beings introduced in Immortal Iron Fist #20. And last but not least is Madrid, Spain on July 18th, 1903, the year that Madrid Symphony Orchestra was founded, a fact that I know, and now you know too. However, doesn't matter how you slice it, it's bad news according to the TVA, because the creation of the multiverse will inevitably lead to multiversal war, and that's teeing up a whole host of other Phase 4 projects like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Spider-Man No Way Home, and presumably Ant-Man Quantumania as well. And that's to say nothing of rumors about Secret Wars being on the horizon as well. Anyway, if you spotted any additional juicy timeline details here, let us know in the comments below, but we'll definitely be exploring this more after I've had my body weight in coffee. Moving on, Judge Renslayer leaps to action, grabbing her trusty truncheon and gets ready to crack some time skulls, but back in Roxcart, our Loki makes the fateful decision to follow Lady Loki through a time door, leaving Mobius and the rest of the TVA in the dust, thinking the God of Mischief has betrayed them, stabbed them in the back once again.
Damn it!
And that is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 2. This plot is getting thicker than Thanos, and we have plenty of theories and questions about what those tricksy Lokis could actually be up to, and what this newly formed multiverse means for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So plenty of rabbit holes and theories for you to dive into over on Nerdist.com in the meantime. But folks, tell us, what did you think about Loki Episode 2? What do you think the Loki variant is actually up to? And did you spot anything that we missed?
I found something.
No, I said don't bother me until you read all the files.
I have.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com. Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 3. It's your Loki day, Marvel fans, because the third episode of the God of Mischief's eponymous Disney Plus series titled Lamentis delivered some unexpected lore, shocking twists, and a seriously delightful amount of banter following the utter chaos of Lady Loki's sacred timeline bombing in Episode 2. Now we're going to go through the episode carefully to put all of those Easter eggs, comic book connections, and hidden details that you might have missed under the proverbial microscope, but as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com. However, to discuss this episode in detail, we obviously need to spoil what happens. So if you haven't seen episode 3 yet, leave now or forfeit your right to act like it's the end of the world.
Is that a bit of a spoiler for you? Sorry about that.
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? Episode 3, Lamentis, picks up both before and after the end of episode 2 to provide some valuable context about Lady Loki's plans, who she really is, and some shocking revelations about the Time Variance Authority. And we also get to see fantastic chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Sophia DiMartino as these two different Loki variants who reluctantly realize they need each other if they want to survive this thing in one piece. Now, the title of the episode itself is actually an Easter egg. Lamentis is a Kree outworld on the very edges of Kree space that first appeared in 2007's Annihilation Conquest Prologue #1. And while I don't expect to see Quasar or the Nega Band show up anytime soon, it's a fun detail nonetheless, and the color palette of the planet from the comics carries over to the show. The episode begins on a much more curious note with Lady Loki, or Sylvie as we'll learn she prefers to be called, confirmed by that Sylvie Laufey's-daughter detail from a dossier in last week's episode. She's having margaritas with Hunter C20, played by Sasha Lane, while Hayley Kiyoko's Demons plays in the background. At least C20 thinks she's having margaritas, when really what's happening is a fantasy that Sylvie is projecting into her mind while enchanting her in real life so Sylvie can interrogate C20 about the true location of the Timekeepers inside the TVA. And this lends further credence to the idea that this is a version of Loki, who's a blend of Lady Loki and Sylvie Lushton / the Enchantress from the comics. Plus, it's just a fitting song choice considering the chorus repeats the phrase, "Please forgive me, I've got demons in my head." Well, not demons, green wiggly woos as opposed to Wanda Maximoff's red wiggly woos. By the way, for the record, a brain freeze is essentially a short-term headache caused by sudden temperature change in your mouth and throat, which rapidly constricts and expands your blood vessels. That in turn triggers a pain response from your trigeminal nerve that carries intense sensations to your brain in response to extreme stimuli, like an ice-cold margarita or a God of Mischief manipulating your memories. Anyway, back in the Roxcart store in Alabama circa 2050, Sylvie learned those gold elevators in the Time Variance Authority lead directly to the Timekeepers. And that keeps up with this whole Wizard of Oz parallel we have going here. It's a yellow brick elevator to reveal who's behind that curtain. After the title sequence, we see Sylvie infiltrate the TVA, and upon realizing her magic is no good here, she beats the living crap out of some poor unsuspecting Minutemen, dissolving at least 2 in the process with their own energy truncheons. Now, a loudspeaker summons all Minutemen to the armory to protect the sacred timeline, which is actively exploding with dozens of new branch timelines after episode 2, which makes this the perfect time to attack. Now, our Loki, L1130, follows shortly thereafter and remembers his trusty twin daggers are conveniently stashed in Mobius's locker, which he then retrieves and flips in a signature way like he does in Thor Ragnarok. The Lokis do righteous battle in front of the aforementioned golden elevator, which looks like the same one that Loki rode with Mobius previously. It's flanked by a pair of TVA murals, one featuring the agency logo and a clock, the other with the Timekeepers. And while I don't think that Loki's making a subtle Who Framed Roger Rabbit reference when he tells Sylvie that she lacks vision, that movie is burned into my brain for all time, always, so here we are.
You lack vision.
You lack vision.
But if she is really lacking vision, I don't know, maybe Sylvie should change her name to Wanda instead. I said Their fight is interrupted by Judge Renslayer and a pair of hunters who try to murder the Lokis in lukewarm blood, but they're thwarted when our Loki opens a time door using the TVA's trusty remote control device that we now know is called a tempad. They land in a makeshift mining facility where their fight continues. And like in the Rocks Cart store in episode 2, Sylvie once again objects to being called a Loki as they squabble over control of the tempad before they're ultimately interrupted by falling space debris. As it turns out, they arrived on Lamentis 1 in the year 2077, only to find out that not only are they smack dab in the middle of an apocalypse event, but it's the worst apocalypse event of them all, which is really saying something.
Of all of the apocalypses saved on that tempad, this is the worst!
Yeah, it's pretty bad out there. Almost as bad as Cyberpunk 2077 on a base PS4. And remember how much damage Thanos caused with the moon on Titan? Well, this is worse than that. And to make matters worse still, the tempad is out of juice, so they need to find a way to recharge it if they ever want to survive to destroy the TVA another day, which Sylvie very much wants because she's been planning that for years. Sylvie tries and fails to enchant Loki because, according to Loki, his mind is just too handsome and strong.
I am smart. I know.
And while willpower definitely plays a role here, I do have a feeling it has more to do with them being roughly equal in power level considering their variants of each other.
What's he doing?
What are you doing?
And speaking of power, they reluctantly accept that they do in fact need one another to find more juice for the tempad, and then they get down to basically bantering for the rest of the episode. We learn that Sylvie no longer identifies as Loki and prefers to go by her chosen name, and I've seen some folks out there speculating that she isn't a Loki variant at all, but I still maintain that she's a combination of Loki and Enchantress from the comics. Sylvie also smartly cuts Loki down a peg, calling him out on his assertion that independence, authority, and style are what defines a Loki, because after all, he's working for the boring, oppressive Time Police. Sylvie's plan is to destroy the Time Variance Authority, create a power vacuum, and then just walk away. At least that's how it seems to Loki and us. It's honestly a nice way for the show to dance around its overarching ongoing debate about the nature of free will, order, and chaos. Loki doesn't know what he wants because he's an agent of chaos and he's trying to harness the unharnessable to exert control over his life. And while Sylvie might not have a Thanos-level endgame in mind, she does have a single-minded focus, unlike a certain Loki I could name. It's Loki. Now, the abandoned mining village looks straight out of Borderlands or the Outer Worlds with its large signage, rusted buildings, and space western aesthetic. As for the signs, my first guess was that they're in Cree given the lamentus of it all, but honestly it kind of looks like stylized Cyrillic. So if you know what these signs actually say, please let us know in the comments below, because my sleep-addled brain could not decipher them just yet. What I can decipher, though, is that there are posters in this town for the Ark, the rocket ship leaving the planet intended to preserve the last vestiges of Lamentian life. But unfortunately for the Lamentians, that Ark is also the best chance of finding enough power to recharge the tempad so our heroes can escape. So will the Lamentians all die? I mean, yes, but they were gonna die anyway, so no harm, no foul, am I right? Huh? Anyway, Loki and Sylvie wander onto the set of The Mandalorian or something to try and trick a settler woman to giving them power and or information. She falls for neither Sylvie's brute force attempt nor Loki's shapeshifting to look like her mean dead husband, Patrice, and she blasts them both with a space rifle that would make Rocket Raccoon drool with envy.
Oh, yeah.
The woman calls them both devils, and while Sylvie's horns do make her a dead ringer for a certain 16th century stained glass in a French church, they're no Mephistos. And speaking of devilish tricks, the writing on the wall of the Lamentian woman's home looks awfully similar to the Krakoan language from House of X and Powers of X, but sadly, X does not mark the spot, and I'm just way too sleepy. Moving on, Loki and Sylvie try to sneak their way onto a train, walking past common folks in purple work gear and guards that look like a Super Sentai version of Cobra Commander. Here we see Loki and Sylvie really working together for the very first time as they both use their powers of deception, Loki's shapeshifting and Sylvie's enchantment, to sneak past the guards onto the train to Sharu, a nearby city where the Ark is apparently located. Also, as confirmed by the end credits, the two guards they encounter at the train entrance are named Private Hudson and Corporal Hicks, names you may recognize from Aliens as played in that movie by Bill Paxton and Michael Biehn respectively. After scamming their way onto the Fifth Element meets Hunger Games train, which was teased in the series trailers, Loki and Sylvie finally get to know each other a little bit better. We learn just how deep of an effect Loki's adoptive mother Frigga had on him, teaching him magic from a very young age. And that makes this Loki's knowledge that he one day gets her killed during the events of Thor the Dark World that much more devastating. It's almost as bad as Sylvie knowing that she was adopted from the start and Loki only finding out years later.
No, I knew I was adopted.
What? It's honestly one of the best scenes in the entire series thus far, thanks to its thoughtful yet quippy writing and the undeniable chemistry between these two incredible actors. We learn about the fireworks cantrip that Loki's mom used to cast for him as a kid, that Sylvie taught herself to enchant people, that Sylvie may or may not have maintained a relationship with a postman across space and time, which in my headcanon is a variant of Dennis from WandaVision, and perhaps most significantly that Sylvie and Loki are now canonically bisexual in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as confirmed by both the show itself and director Kate Herron on Twitter. Outside the MCU, Loki was also established to be pansexual in the 2019 YA novel Loki, Where Mischief Lies. Although the two orientations are obviously not the same, this is a major step forward for queer representation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which previously would only hint at LGBTQ characters obliquely, if at all. Case in point, the most visible explicitly queer character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe before this was Joe Russo's cameo as a gay man in Captain America's grief counseling group in Avengers Endgame, which isn't saying much. Now, obviously, there is still so much more to be done, but for now, Loki, one of the most visible and iconic characters in the MCU, is living his truth. So with that said, happy Pride Month, everybody. Hell yeah. Moving on, Sylvie wakes up from a much-needed nap to see that Loki has graduated from double-fisting space champagne to drinking Chekhov's gin. Loki has turned the train's bar into his own personal Asgardian karaoke room, singing in his native tongue in a much more joyous fashion than when Wanda Maximoff sang a Sokovian lullaby on WandaVision. As confirmed by the end credits, Hiddles McGriddles is actually singing in Norwegian, a song whose title I will definitely butcher, Jeg sale min ganger. I'm so sorry to any Norwegian and or Asgardian viewers, but please tell me the proper way to pronounce it in the comments below. I'm trying to be better about this. Now, one of the best moments in this scene is also a callback to 2011's Thor when Loki demands a refill by throwing his glass to the ground and shouting, "Another!
Another!
Just like his beefy brother did back in a New Mexico diner during Phase 1.
Another!
Unfortunately, Loki is so drunk that he changed back into his Time Variant Authority outfit, and that Bail Organa cosplayer that was ahead of them in line for the train snitches to the guards, which leads to an all-out fight with Loki and Sylvie. We also get an interesting detail here that Sylvie has spent her entire life running from those omniscient fascists that Loki works for. During the fight, things escalate quickly. Sylvie uses her horned headband as a makeshift weapon, which explains why one of them is likely broken off. And this also echoes Loki using his helm as a weapon during Thor Ragnarok. I guess they are variants after all. Loki proves why you should never bring cocktails to a knife fight, and then he manages to Sparta kick one of the guards out of the moving train, only to be summarily defenestrated himself. Sylvie then in turn jumps after him, but before she does, we see a smattering of Asgardian runes on her ornate sword. They look to be equal parts gibberish and Elder Futhark based on my research, but I'll keep trying to translate them in the meantime. That said, if you know what they say, you know what to do. Tell me. I'm dying over here. And although Loki didn't fall for 30 minutes, he did manage to land on the tempad, breaking the device completely, much to Sylvie's chagrin. After an argument about hedonism, cooler heads prevail, and they decide to hijack the Ark to ensure it makes it off Lamentis in one piece. As they follow those convenient signs towards Sharu, Sylvie finally explained the secret behind her enchantment ability. She needs to make physical contact and grab hold of her target's mind. For stronger-willed targets like Hunter C-20, she needs to create a fantasy from their memories, which in turn leads to the biggest bombshell revelation yet, and confirmation of a popular fan theory, the fact that all the agents of the Time Variance Authority are actually regular people. They are variants plucked from Earth to preserve the sacred timeline according to the Timekeeper's will. They were not created by those unseen space lizards who actually might not exist at all. And speaking of which, if you want to know more about who's really running the show at the TVA, watch our recent theory video, which I will link to in the description below. Now, Hunter C-20, for example, was a normal person who loved margaritas, and Sylvie had to pluck memories from long before she joined the TVA to get the stuff she needed. This means that somewhere out there, Mobius definitely owned a jet ski before he was unceremoniously ripped from the 1990s to work in a space-time bureaucracy. And I, for one, will be damned if we don't get to see him ride one by the series' end.
It'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it'd be really fun.
But back to the matter at hand. Our heroes find themselves in the swirling chaos of Sharu with just 5 minutes remaining until the Ark launches, and what follows is a truly breathtaking tracking shot inspired by Children of Men, according to Loki writer and producer Eric Martin. And while there are several cuts in the action, they're masked quite smoothly through transitional shots in a way that makes the whole thing feel seamless. In the background, we get a neon pair of eyes of Dr. T.J. Ecclesburg watching Loki and Sylvie as they frantically run through the moral wasteland of Lamentis, fending off guards and debris in equal measure. Loki really gets to flex his Asgardian muscles here by using his sorcery to repel a massive piece of debris that's about to crush them. While some might think that Loki is using the time stone that he seemingly nabbed from Casey's desk back in episode 1, I don't think that's the case, because telekinesis is actually a part of Loki's power set, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, with all of that said, unfortunately, our heroes are too late. Loki, Sylvie, and the surviving Lamentians look on in utter horror and despair as the Ark is destroyed by planetary debris, while Bonnie Guitar's Dark Moon plays over the end credits. And speaking of the end credits, if you've been paying careful attention, the photos of Loki on the desk keep changing each episode, presumably as the TVA tracks their whereabouts. And there you have it, folks. That is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 3. And now that we've reached the midpoint of the series, we have more questions than answers, but we fortunately have a whole bunch of theories that'll play out on Nerdist in the days ahead. But folks, with that said, in the meantime, tell me, what did you think about Episode 3? What did you think of Lamentis? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Nobody cares. It's the end of the world.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com. Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 4. Folks, it's the end of the world as we know it, and unfortunately Loki does not feel fine. After the apocalyptic ending of Loki Episode 3, Lamentis, we were left to wonder how exactly the Gods of Mischief might escape their planetary predicament. Well, Episode 4, titled The Nexus Event, woke up and chose violence. It gave us some unexpected answers, raised even wilder questions, and delivered some seriously shocking moments. I mean, case in point, there is a mid-credit scene. Did you watch it? Because if you didn't, you can low-key catch these hands if you go any further. I'm gonna get you. Now, our finest Time Variant Authority agents stayed up until the wee hours of the morning, tearing up this episode like a sweet-ass jet ski on the open ocean to uncover all of its many secrets, Easter eggs, and hidden details that you might have missed. And if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. However, in order to talk about this episode in detail, we do kinda need to spoil what happened, so if you haven't seen it yet, leave now or else you forfeit your right to act like spoilers are the end of the world. Okay, let's get into it, shall we? I mean, first of all, holy smokes, what an episode, right? I mean, I know, look, 2 episodes to go, but in one fell swoop, dozens of Loki fan theories were just pruned from our sacred timeline. We got the terrible truth about the Time Variance Authority confirmed, we learned why the Timekeepers run like clockwork, and we witnessed some murders most foul, or at least we thought we did. And that's all to say nothing of that genuinely bonkers mid-credits scene. But first, let's dial our TemPads back to the beginning of the episode, which sees the wee baby Sylvie playing with some toys in her version of Asgard. We see her flying a little Valkyrie around on a Pegasus trying to escape a dragon, the kind that we saw in Muspelheim in Thor Ragnarok. And it's all above a little longboat toy and a Fenris, one of those massive wolves of Asgard that Hela rode on in Thor Ragnarok as well. Unfortunately, playtime is short-lived because Ravonna Renslayer steps through a time door not as a judge, but as Hunter A23 flanked by Minutemen. And as previously mentioned, A23 is an Easter egg itself, referring to Ravonna's first appearance in the comics in Avengers number 23. She proceeds to arrest Sylvie and reset her timeline, but the reasoning why is left vague, and more on that in just a little bit. A scared Sylvie is brought through the TVA, faced with a screaming prisoner being manhandled by yet another Hunter, and then she's put through the same brutal onboarding process as Loki was in episode 1, and then she's brought before this stone-faced judge. Now, unlike Loki L1130, Sylvie actually manages to escape by stomping on Ravonna's foot and pilfering her TemPad, which she uses to escape through a time door to begin what we learn is a lifetime of running from apocalypse to apocalypse to stay one step ahead of the TVA. Now, it's a traumatizing memory for Sylvie, but a humiliating one for Ravonna, who's clearly fixating on it as she takes that golden elevator up to see the Timekeepers in person. Well, in person is a generous term, as we'll learn later in this episode, but she goes to speak to her bosses nonetheless. And while the large red symbol behind the Timekeepers gave me the impression of a rune at first, like the kind we saw in WandaVision, the technological nature of everything else about the TVA and the Timekeepers themselves has me thinking it might just be some sweet-ass gamer lighting. So, sick setup, bros. Nice battle station. After a sweet match cut from the Timekeepers to their tile murals, we learn that Hunter C20 is apparently straight up dead. Ravonna claims that Sylvie scrambled C20's brain with her enchantment, and that's why Mobius can't interrogate her. Ravonna's really laying it on thick here with the TVA talking points about how, oh my god, it's so impossible to keep this timeline stable. Oh my god, the Timekeepers, they're our only hope. Wink. It all makes what comes later in the episode that much more devastating, especially with what happens with Mobius. And although we don't get an Owen Wilson wow, we do get a what, how, and later on a now, which are hereafter considered wow variants.
What? How? What? How? Wow.
In the next scene, we return to Lamentis, just outside Sharu in the flaming ruins of the Ark spaceship in the background. The planet is in full apocalypse mode as our Lokis share a nice heart-to-heart in the scene from the trailer, which everyone thought was Loki talking to Natasha Romanoff somewhere on Vormir, which, It's not. And here we learn just how horrifying Sylvie's entire life has been.
Everywhere and everywhen I went caused a Nexus event.
Sylvie grew up in the end of 1,000 worlds, which explains why she's a little bit jaded. I mean, look, I get it. The bigger question, though, which Sylvie sadly doesn't get an answer to later on, is why she specifically was targeted by the TVA. Apparently, the mere fact of her being born created a big enough detour from the sacred timeline to warrant the TVA's intervention. So is someone just out there targeting Lokis willy-nilly, and if so, why? What threat do Lokis pose if they're allowed to run amok unabated apart from, like, cutting hair? Are they being rounded up to harness the chaos energy they clearly possess? I don't know, but I'm sure we'll find out next episode. Anyway, back in the TVA, we see Mobius, Hunter B-15, and a crew of chronomonitors searching the sacred timeline for the missing Lokis. Now, interestingly enough, the sacred timeline here actually looks pretty stable following Sylvie's bombing in episode 2. And we also see a few interesting dates and locations on the monitor, including Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, which was once home to the world's longest covered bridge, which was then subsequently destroyed by inclement weather in 1832, the date on the screen. Now, I'm not sure I'd classify that as an apocalypse event, but then again, I wasn't on that bridge, so who can say? We also see Morag, the planet that houses the Power Stone in Guardians of the Galaxy, and apparently it suffered a climate apocalypse of some sort that caused the oceans to catastrophically rise, so maybe this is the moment the tide rose a little too far. And above we see Sakaar, the junkyard world we spent a lot of time on in Thor Ragnarok, and Alberta, Canada, birthplace of Wolverine and home to a secret Weapon X facility in the comics. The screen at one point reads Timeline 400, which immediately made us think of Thor 400's Lest the Heavens Perish, a story about Thor battling Surtur across space and time. But then again, it also reads 395 at one part, and I seriously doubt we're going to see the Earth Force from Thor 395 in the MCU anytime soon. Then, in a moment that probably exploded thousands of shippers' brains like overripe melons, our gods of mischief share a tender moment, holding hands and embracing their imminent demise, which actually turns out to be precisely what saves them. It creates such a powerful temporal spike on the sacred timeline that it generates a branch unlike anything the TVA has ever seen, and it lets them pinpoint their location. Just like in Interstellar, the power of love can overcome space and time itself, but unlike Interstellar, our heroes do wind up back in space-time prison. But with that said, both stories do loosely involve an unexpected and untrustworthy Matt Damon.
I'm a trickster. Yes, so mischievous.
Anyway, that's all to say that you can take this as confirmation that no, episode 3 was not an elaborate enchantment. Anyway, Loki and Sylvie find themselves outfitted with time collars and brought to separate time theaters for interrogation. Loki is salty that Sylvie has more security than he does, and Mobius is salty that Loki betrayed him.
You betrayed me. You betrayed me. Oh, grow up. Grow up.
But unfortunately for Loki, he is the boy who cried Fenris. When he tries to tell Mobius the truth about the TVA, the one time he actually tries to tell the truth, he gets thrown into a time cell, which is basically a solitary confinement that takes one of your bad memories and loops it on repeat, which just sounds like me trying to go to sleep. Anyway, for Loki, this means that he's back in Asgard, but constantly reliving getting the snot beaten out of him by Lady Sif after a prank gone awry.
You did this!
What?
You remember Lady Sif, right? The mighty Asgardian warrior? Well, Jamie Alexander is back as Lady Sif for the very first time since Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 2. Now, this prank is actually straight out of Norse mythology as well, and it's also appeared in the comics several times in the past, including in 1983's Thor Annual number 11. Honestly though, I mean, name a more iconic duo than Marvel villains and getting trapped in time loops. It worked on Dormammu and Doctor Strange, in a way it worked on Thanos, and now it's working on Loki.
Seriously?
Anyway, be sure to let us know what your time cell memory would be in the comments below. Moving on, back at the TVA, Mobius goes to Ravana's office to get permission to interrogate Sylvie, but he's summarily denied, and it's part of a pattern of increasingly sus behavior by Ravana, which comes to a deadly head by the episode's end. Mobius, though, has a particularly fascinating line in this scene as well.
I mean, if there's a mastermind here, I don't think it's Loki.
Although we previously speculated that a Loki variant might be the one behind the TVA, this episode and particularly that post-credit scene have me thinking that it's going to be someone else entirely. So with that said, Kang Watch is back in full effect, baby. Kang Watch. Now, considering how suspicious Ravana's acting in this episode, the secrets that she's harboring, and her connections to Kang in the comics, I for one am back on the train that she's either working in cahoots with Kang directly or on his behalf. After all, Ravana has at various points in the comics disguised herself as Nebula, infiltrated the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, and she even ruled over Kang's home base of Chronopolis, which we glimpsed in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, with that said, anything is possible, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Miss Minutes is the big bad here. Only time will tell. Kind of like what Miss Minutes should do if she was just a clock and not this nightmare creature.
That is not nice. jerk.
Now we see that Sylvie's being held in Time Theater number 47, which is a fun coincidence because What If number 47 is a story called What If Loki Found Thor's Hammer First? And that feels fitting and could maybe even be a subtle reference to Sylvie's Nexus event, like what if she's actually meant to be a good guy? And additionally, Thor number 47 is a story involving a duplicate Thor, Tareen, who's basically a Thor variant called Thor Girl, and the Enchantress all in one saga. But more importantly, here Mobius mentions the TVA has processed Kree, Titans, and vampires. As a reminder, the Kree are the warlike aliens we first met in Guardians of the Galaxy, like Ronan the Accuser, who later persecuted the Skrulls and also gaslit Captain Marvel. Titans are the people of Thanos' homeworld of Titan, and vampires are what we're going to see Mahershala Ali hunt in Blade when that finally comes out.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
In the Marvel Universe, vampires were created by the Darkhold, the Tome of Black Magic that we see in WandaVision, but something tells me that the vamp variant they brought in might belong in another cinematic universe entirely. Back in Loki's time cell, he comes to yet another staggering realization about himself. I crave attention because I'm a narcissist, and I suppose it's because I'm scared of being alone. Like, what the hell? This is the brutalest therapy session possible. And as if on cue, Mobius appears to interrogate Loki even further, but apparently it's a game of chess versus checkers. Mostly Mobius tries to navigate Loki's myriad lies by using the prisoner's dilemma against him and teasing Loki about being in love with a variant of himself and explaining why that's likely what caused the Nexus event on Lamentus.
You like her.
What?
You like her.
Things reach a fever pitch, and Loki ultimately spills the beans that the TVA ripped Mobius and everyone inside the TVA from their respective timelines and erased their memories, which we now know is why they killed Hunter C-20. And while Mobius isn't quite ready to accept the truth, Hunter B-15 is having a dark night of the soul. She stares at a TVA propaganda poster featuring a very big brothery image of what kind of looks like Mark Gruenwald and or the original Mobius design from the comics. Anyway, we think that B-15's about to go inside the Time Theater and kill Sylvie, but instead she frees her from her shackles and takes her back to Roxcart in Alabama circa 2050 to get some answers. When Sylvie enchanted B-15 in episode 2, B-15 saw memories of her old life. Sylvie explained that she can't create memories, only bring existing ones to the forefront, and what follows is a haunting, beautiful homage to Roy Batty's iconic Tears in the Rain speech from Blade Runner. In that speech, Roy Batty expresses that although he's an android replicant, he is capable of real human emotion and experiences. Likewise, B-15 realizes that she isn't just a TVA drone, she had an entire life that was ripped away from her by the Timekeepers and their lies. Now, we had a more oblique reference on WandaVision as well when the theater marquee read Tannhauser Gate, but this homage feels deliberate in the best way possible. I mean, come on, we literally get Tears in the Rain! Now, while this is happening, Ravonna and Mobius play a conversational game of cat and mouse. To keep the 1984 parallel going, the two sip on Victory Whiskey, or Victory Gin, while listening to some sweet theremin music on the hi-fi. Ravonna uses that blue FDR high school pen again to sign an ex parte motion to stay execution. This is basically authorizing the pruning of Loki and Sylvie and the closing of their cases after Mobius got Ravonna to loan Loki to him as a mischievous mindhunter. Now, speaking of that pen, while I still think it's a blue herring, I do like the theory that connects the Franklin Delano Roosevelt High School in Brooklyn, New York in real life to Molecule Man, a character from the comics who has matter manipulation abilities with major multiversal implications. He played a pivotal role in both the 1985 Secret Wars event with the Beyonder and the 2015 Secret Wars event with Doctor Doom that was basically interdimensional Game of Thrones. Now, again, I do think it's more of a stretch than Reed Richards doing yoga, but it's the kind of unhinged tinfoil hat theory that I just love to contemplate with shows like Loki. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Ravonna tries to sweep everything under the rug, but Mobius just wants the truth. Ravonna deflects by saying she's trying to protect Mobius, and she gaslights him again and again, but he pulls a fast one on her by swapping their temp pads when Ravonna goes to put Sylvie's dagger on her trophy case. Now, clearly they've both been spending way too much time with Loki's. Now, Mobius not so slyly excuses himself to sneak off to the archives and search Ravonna's temp pad for clues. He finds Hunter C-20's case file, which includes several mission dates, including the March 15th, 2050 date, which took her from the Ides of March into the eye of a Category 8 hurricane in future Alabama. Mobius also uncovers a hidden file of Ravonna interrogating C-20, who confirms everything that Loki told him about the TVA and confirms that Ravonna had C-20 killed. With this whole reality crashing down around him, Mobius frees Loki from his time cell only to come face to face with Ravonna and some hunters. Mobius tries to play it off, but the jig is clearly up. He tells Ravonna that he just wants to go back to where he's really from, where he had a jet ski, when suddenly, out of nowhere, Ravonna has him pruned. It's such a brutal scene because of how sudden and violent it is. You have Loki's stunned reaction, the fact that Ravonna can't even watch what she just ordered. Honestly, I can't really imagine that Mobius is gone forever. I don't know, maybe he goes wherever Loki does in the post-credit scene, or we'll see another variant of Mobius riding a jet ski somewhere down the timeline, but for the time being, it's just really sad. Anyway, Ravonna collects Sylvie from her cell and realizes that B-15 has gone rogue as well. So to preserve the Timekeeper's secrets, Ravonna brings the two Loki variants into that gold elevator to see the Timekeepers Astvorth and Xanth. But not before Ravonna delivers that last devastating blow that she doesn't even remember why she brought Sylvie to the TVA in the first place.
I don't remember.
Now, it's probably another lie, because if not, it's just a testament to the cruelty of the Time Variance Authority and the destruction they leave in their wake in the name of maintaining order. Inside the Timekeeper's chambers, we get our best look at those space lizards in all of their weird floating glory, and it's fascinating because each of the Timekeepers has their own unique voice, but it all kind of sounds like one person doing 3 different voices. Much like Benedict Cumberbatch voiced Dormammu in Doctor Strange, this could perhaps be known vocal chameleon Tom Hiddleston voicing the Timekeepers here. Or in a truly deranged bit of speculation, this could maybe be Jonathan Majors serving up some Kang kookiness before we potentially get a glimpse of him in the season finale. Although, with that said, Jonathan Majors has played it super cool in interviews about Loki, so I'm not getting my hopes up because it's probably Loki's all the way down. But unfortunately for the Timekeepers, their only cosmic disappointment is that B-15 shows up to free Loki and Sylvie. A raucous battle ensues, culminating in Sylvie cutting off one of their heads, which causes the other two to laugh uproariously. And they're laughing because the Timekeepers, or at least these ones, are just elaborate animatronics.
Mindless androids.
While it's possible these Timekeepers are decoys for the real Timekeepers, I think it's far likelier that there are no actual Timekeepers, and these are just a front for whomever's really behind the curtain in this interdimensional Wizard of Oz meets Charles Entertainment cheese riff. Although our heroes feel defeated by this revelation, Loki finally decides to tell Sylvie how he really feels about her, but Sylvie isn't really picking up what he's putting down. Now, fortunately for everyone weirded out by this ship, Ravonna wakes up to bonk Loki with a horny bat, pruning him from existence and seemingly killing him. The episode ends with Sylvie disarming Ravonna as we cut to the sweet strains of Brenda Lee singing "If You Love Me, Really Love Me." Well, I don't know, maybe ends is a bit of an overstatement because that mid-credit scene finds Loki waking up from being pruned in a field outside the ruins of a giant city. Now, as we previously speculated, this appears to be a version of New York City where the Avengers lost during the Battle of New York and failed to stop the Chitauri invasion. Alan Silvestri's "I'll Take That Drink Now" theme from Avengers plays in the background as Loki awakens to an unexpected sight. 4 Loki variants standing in front of the ruins of Stark Tower. We see Richard E. Grant as classic Loki according to the credits, wearing the God of Mischief's classic comic book costume from way back in Journey into Mystery number 85, Jack Veal as Kid Loki, who first appeared in Thor 617, and Diobia Opare as what the credits call Boastful Loki, and this version is wielding what appears to be a variant Mjolnir hammer. His design kind of looks like a mix of the worthy Loki able to wield Mjolnir in Loki Agent of Asgard number 9 mixed with the cover of Loki Volume 2 number 1, which coincidentally is another story where Loki cuts Sif's hair. He can't help himself. And last but not least, we have Alligator Loki, which you can tell is not a crocodile because of its U-shaped snout. And you can tell it's a Loki because of its tiny Loki hat. I gotta say, honestly, I am just thrilled to see this new Gator Loki because it's a perfect counterpoint to Throg, the frog version of Thor. So fingers crossed that bad boy is here to stay. Anyway, it looks like the Sif is gonna hit the fan next week as multiple Lokis team up to take down the Timekeepers, the TVA, and whomever else might be hunting down all these many Loki variants from across the multiverse. And as we've seen in previous trailers in that weird funhouse, these Loki variants are gonna get into a big old fight, so expect fisticuffs, mischief, and hopefully even more tiny animal clothes in episode 5. And there you have it, folks. That is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 4. With just 2 episodes to go, it's kind of hard to fathom how they're going to wrap everything up in this neat little bundle, or who knows, maybe they won't, and much like the universe, we're heading towards utter chaos. One thing, though, is for certain, we've got theories galore, and we'll be rolling those out on Nerdist in the days ahead. In the meantime, though, folks, tell us, what did you think of Loki Episode 4? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Please, no more. Please, I beg you.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com. Here's everything you might have missed in Loki Episode 5. Just when you thought the God of Mischief couldn't possibly get any more mischievous, Loki Episode 5 threw us for a loop. The penultimate episode of the season, titled Journey into Mystery, picks up in the immediate aftermath of Loki getting pruned in the Timekeeper's chambers, only to find himself face to face with 4 other Loki variants in a ruined hellscape of what we thought was New York City. It turns out it is so much more. And episode 5 gave us incredibly deep-cut comic book references, unexpected reveals, and it set the stakes for next week's truly bonkers finale. Now, after drinking our body weight in coffee, we stayed up all night long to break down this episode in excruciating, exhaustive detail to uncover all of its myriad secrets, Easter eggs, and hidden details that you might have missed.
This drink, I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
Now, as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. Now, obviously, to talk about this episode in detail, we do need to spoil what happened. So if you haven't seen it yet, leave now before it's too late.
Oh, you beef-witted, half-faced scrubs! We had a deal!
Loki dokie, folks, let's get into it, shall we? Now, first and foremost, holy mackerel, this episode is dense with Easter eggs and hidden details. Once again, the episode title is an Easter egg in and of itself. Journey into Mystery was a horror comics anthology that began in June 1952 at Marvel's predecessor Atlas Comics. Later, it became more sci-fi oriented, and then in 1962, it introduced Thor and Loki in issues 83 and 85, respectively. Here, the title is fitting, though, because we, the audience, are journeying with Loki, Sylvie, and the other variants into the mysterious world of the Void, the garbage dump at the end of time itself, where all of the Time Variance Authority's pruned timelines are ultimately transported. Now, this obviously raises a whole host of questions that probably won't get answered until next week, if at all, but at least we know that Loki ultimately respects the law of conservation of mass. The episode begins on a trippy note, flying through the TVA and inverting the camera angle in disorienting ways. We see the sacred timeline monitor with more place names like Zimbabwe, Vormir, and Oak Island, Nova Scotia, which is where Captain Kidd allegedly hid his pirate treasure. Now, one shot fades into another as we move from the chrono monitors, watching the sacred timeline, to the golden elevator leading to the Timekeepers inner sanctum complete with one of their animatronic heads on the floor, to the foggy nightmare realm called the Void that Loki wakes up in at the end of episode 4. We soar past an intact version of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which was pruned from existence in real life by several earthquakes. And from there, we fly through the ruins of the city where we spot Avengers Tower with the Kang Enterprises logo. Now, that's the company that Tony Stark sold Avengers Tower to in Avengers Ultron Forever #1. However, in all new, all different Avengers #6, we learn that Kang's CEO, Mr. Griffin, not only reprogrammed the Vision for his own fell purposes, but he's secretly a version of Kang the Conqueror trapped in the 21st century. I mean, think about it. Kang. It's right there! Don't worry though, because like all good Kangs, he's ultimately sucked into a temporal paradox. Eventually, we arrive at a gaggle of Lokis, catching our variant L1130 up to speed on what exactly is going on here. As mentioned last week, we have Richard E. Grant as classic Loki, rocking his costume straight out of Journey into Mystery number 85, Giobia Opare as the Asian of Asgard-inspired boastful Loki, rocking his version of Mjolnir, Jack Veal as Kid Loki from Thor 617, and Gator Dunn as the newly minted Loki Gator, which is not his real name, but he's my favorite character.
Hang on. You're telling me that thing's a Loki too?
Oh, yes.
They're standing next to a bust that reads Callum Ross, which is a subtle reference to one of Loki's editors. Loki is apparently in a place known as the Void, and that massive murder cloud behind him is a creature known as Alioth. Created by Mark Gruenwald and Mike Gustovich, Alioth first appeared in 1993's Avengers The Terminatrix Objective, and Alioth is a massive, matter-destroying temporal cloud that Ravonna Renslayer accidentally released while trying to expand Kang the Conqueror's empire of Chronopolis. And needless to say, it's incredibly powerful, and bad news bears for our heroes. Now, back at the TVA, Sylvie finally has Ravonna cornered, and she learns the truth of what really happens when the TVA prunes a branch reality.
Basically, the branch timeline isn't reset. It's transferred.
To where?
A void at the end of time.
Ravonna pleads ignorance as to who's really at the top of this TVA pyramid, but considering that she knows what really happens to pruned matter, this feels like a load of hogwash if you ask me. Anyway, back in the Void, we see the rotting hulk of a pirate ship, maybe Captain Kidd's perhaps, and what appears to be a standard issue UFO. The Loki variants walk past the Hydra parasite aircraft that Red Skull escapes in from Captain America the First Avenger, and then we see amid a sea of giant stone heads that look like the ones from Sakaar and Thor Ragnarok, and a bunch of weird little blue birds, Loki freaking out at the utter lack of exposition, at least if you ask him.
Will someone please explain to me what the hell is going on?
We learn that all of these Loki variants were arrested and pruned by the TVA, that Alioth devours a lot of the garbage dumped here, and no one has ever managed to escape even by causing a Nexus event.
Okay, fine. Willing to accept that.
And speaking of which, we learn that Kid Loki's Nexus event was killing Thor. So maybe Loki's snake stabbing prank from Thor Ragnarok went a little awry in Kid Loki's world? Who knows?
It was indeed hilarious.
Anyway, there's no time to dwell on this because in the very next shot we see a giant Yellow Jacket helmet which may or may not belong to an alternate reality Darren Cross from Ant-Man. Now, there is another Kang connection here in the comics because in Avengers Forever #7, Hank Pym as Yellow Jacket betrays the Avengers to Immortus, who is another version of Kang, as well as to the Timekeepers before he ultimately decides to help his friends. Now, next up is the single greatest Easter egg in Marvel history, the Thanos Copter. Now, this certified comic book legend first appeared in 1979 Spidey Super Stories number 39. It was used by Thanos to try and steal the Cosmic Cube from Hellcat. Anyway, our band of brokies walks past this chopper and a massive black and yellow rocket to take shelter in their secret bowling alley base. As the camera pans down, we see amid the sea of cafeteria trays in the soil, Thor's hammer Mjolnir and a jar labeled T365 containing the frog version of Thor. T365 is a reference to Thor 365, a story called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or It's Not Easy Being Green. And in this story, Thor is transformed into a frog by Loki. Now, this is technically a different character than Throg, who is a college football player named Simon Walterson, a malapropism of longtime Thor writer Walt Simonson, who was turned into a frog by a witch, renamed Puddlegulp by other frogs in Central Park, and then imbued with the power of Thor himself when he picked up a sliver of Mjolnir. You know, that old classic comic book explanation for this. As Loki surveys the hideout, we get a glimpse of its craziness, including a throne amid bowling pins and candy canes, these strange vines, Chekhov's popcorn machine, and a Polybius arcade cabinet, which is a reference to one of the greatest urban legends of our time. Named for the Greek philosopher Polybius, it was an arcade game that was supposedly part of a government psyop in Portland, Oregon circa 1981, designed to induce addictive psychoactive effects in anyone who played it. Meanwhile, back at the TVA, Sylvie has a theory of her own. Much like she hid from the TVA during apocalypses, whoever's really behind all of this is probably hiding in the void at the end of time. Miss Minutes buys Ravonna Renslayer valuable time to summon a bunch of guards by spinning a yarn about something called the Void spacecraft. It's a spaceship designed to withstand the temporal void, which feels like an oblique reference to the Raft, a ship that Reed Richards designed in 2015 Secret Wars to do the exact same thing. Unfortunately for Sylvie, Ravonna and Miss Minutes are filthy liars, but then to escape and test her theory to find the man behind the proverbial curtain, Sylvie prunes herself. It's a move that genuinely shocks and horrifies the rest of the TVA. Interestingly enough though, when Sylvie prunes herself, she brings Judge Renslayer's Tempad along with her. Meanwhile, back at Loki HQ, our good mischief boys are gripping and sipping on some exceptional Pinot Noir from Roxy Wine, which is presumably the finest box wine at all of Roxcart. But don't worry though, because Kid Loki is drinking a carton of High-C Ecto Cooler instead. We see Gator Loki glurping down that sweet adult grape juice in a kiddie pool next to a copy of the 1930 book, The Mystery and Lore of Monsters, with accounts of some giants, dwarfs, and prodigies by Charles John Samuel Thompson. After that, boastful Loki lives up to his name and ultimately winds up in a fight with Gator Loki. Things get unexpectedly heavy though when Loki asks if they're all supposed to die.
Well, we're supposed to die.
Classic Loki reveals that his ship was also attacked by Thanos, but rather than try to stab the Mad Titan and get some unexpected chiropractic adjustments, he used his magic to do duplication casting so he could disguise himself as debris. Realizing that he causes others pain, Classic Loki laid low for a while on a remote planet, but eventually got lonely and went looking for his brother Thor, at which point the TVA immediately intervened and arrested him. Unwilling to accept his imminent death, our Loki makes a grand speech about Sylvie taking on the TVA and taking down Alioth once and for all, only to be laughed out of the room by the other Lokis.
Yeah, baby! Yeah!
Things then go from bad to worse for our Loki when he opens the hideout hatch to find himself face to face with an army of Loki lackeys led by President Loki from the 2016 Vote Loki miniseries. Creators Chris Hastings and Langdon Foss are thanked in the credits, along with cover artist Valerio Schiti and Tom King, who apparently had the original idea for said story, according to Hastings in an interview with Comic Book Resources. And while these do look like Fallout New Vegas NPCs doing Loki cosplay, they are actually Loki variants, especially because the one wearing sunglasses on the right is identical to one of the pruned variants that Mobius showed us back in episode 2. Moving on, Sylvie wakes up inside a weird bird nest inside of a school bus, which is summarily devoured by Alioth. Sylvie then accidentally makes contact with one of Alioth's smoky tendrils and uses her enchantment magic to get a glimpse of what appears to be a strange gothic mansion on this floating asteroid in a mysterious multicolored space, which looks an awful lot like the Quantum Realm, and gee, I wonder who would hang out there. Gang watch. So could this potentially be Chronopolis, Kang the Conqueror's domain outside the normal flow of time which we glimpsed ever so briefly in Ant-Man and the Wasp? Well, only time will tell. I've seen others out there theorizing this is Doctor Doom's castle, but as much as I want to see 2015's Secret Wars in the MCU, I don't buy it, it's too early. We don't even have a Doctor Doom cast yet. And when we zoom in even further on the door, it appears to be that strange fractured temple that was teased in earlier Loki trailers. And speaking of strange, the tower of said castle mansion is glowing with a yellowish light that we usually associate with the Sorcerer Supreme. So who knows, maybe a variant Doctor Strange. Anyway, Sylvie keeps on booking it only to get saved in the nick of time by Mobius doing his best Lightning McQueen impersonation. He's ka-chowing as fast as he can in a Skinny's pizza delivery car, which features the license plate GRNW1D, or Gruenwald, a subtle nod to his visual inspiration, Marvel writer and editor Mark Gruenwald. There's a small Wrightville theater marquee in the corner, which we saw mentioned previously on a timeline monitor at the TVA, and it has what appears to be the words Oswald and Marina. Now, this could be an apocryphal story about Oswald the Lucky Rabbit finding a boat, but it could also be referencing JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife Marina, both of whom do canonically exist in the Marvel Universe. Now, during their daring escape, we see a pyramid and a sphinx, probably pruned from a timeline where ancient aliens actually did build them instead of actual people, or maybe they're from Rama Tut's rule. I mean, come on, you know Rama Tut, he's the ancient Egyptian pharaoh version of Nathaniel Richards, aka Kang the Conqueror. Kang watch. We then return to Loki HQ, where all hell breaks loose as we learn that boastful Loki betrayed the other Lokis to President Loki, who in turn is betrayed by his Loki lackeys. And here President Loki mentions that he prefers snakes to wolves, which is perhaps a reference to his Thor Ragnarok prank and having battled Hela and Fenris, the giant Asgardian wolf, in that movie. Now, speaking of Thor, much like how the God of Thunder's hand gets chopped off in Thor the Dark World, President Loki's hand gets bitten off by Gator Loki, then rammed into that popcorn machine. During the free-for-alky that ensues, classic Loki uses his duplication casting to help Loki, Kid Loki, Gator Loki, and himself escape. And honestly, it's a pretty bleak scene outside as our Lokis lament their station in life.
We're broken. Every version of us.
In the background, they walk past the wreckage of a building that kind of looks like it's either from Sakaar or maybe even Atlantis with what appears to be seaweed all over it. Thankfully, Loki manages to convince his fellow Lokis to take a chance on themselves and take down Alioth once and for all. Meanwhile, Sylvie and Mobius share some real talk in the car and hatch a similar plan while a Quinjet or the aerial hunter killer from Terminator 2 or another mysterious VTOL aircraft falls out of the sky in the background. Honestly, it's hard to keep up. After that, our Loki gang comes upon a ridge and they're greeted by a massive warship, the USS Eldridge, falling out of thin air. This Cannon-class destroyer escort was a real ship used during World War II, but this variant is likely one where it actually was part of the Philadelphia experiment, a rumored procedure where they turned the ship invisible, teleported it to New York, then to another dimension where they met aliens, then through time where a couple sailors wound up getting fused to the ship's hull. It's honestly super messy and a great Wikipedia hole to fall down into. Sadly, here though, the Eldridge just serves as bait for Alioth. When the sailors are annihilated, they scream similarly to the sound effect used for people being pruned, which is to say, it's utterly horrifying. Thankfully, Mobius and Sylvie arrive on the scene a moment later to offer a much better, far less foolish plan to deal with Alioth. Sylvie wants to enchant it. Back at the TVA, Renslayer interrogates B-15, who's being held captive in a time cell. B-15 calls her out for not wanting to protect the TVA at all, but rather to find the person who's behind the TVA and the timekeepers to boot. Based on Ravonna's comic book history and connections to Kang the Conqueror, this is yet another clue pointing to the upcoming Marvel villain. Or maybe Ravonna here is making like her comic book counterpart and going full Terminatrix. Maybe she's making her play to take over the Time Variance Authority for herself. But then we leave Ravonna on a cryptic note, and she sends Miss Minutes on a mission to pull all files pertaining to the creation of the TVA itself, which, why would she do that if she already knew who was behind the curtain? I don't think she actually knows here. Next up, our Lokis take a load off in an abandoned barbershop to debate whether the alligator really is a Loki or just looks amazing in a tiny hat. And while this is happening, Loki and Sylvie do their best rendition of the wet hot American summer scene when Coop and Katie get way too cold, which, actually doesn't make sense because aren't they both part frost giant? They probably have like a natural cold resistance. Anyway, just be careful, you two. You might cause a Nexus event if you're not careful, which mostly would be within that section of fandom that ships Loki and Mobius over Loki and Sylvie. But kidding aside, it's actually a very sweet scene. We get to see just how far these two have come as characters, the insecurities with which they're racked, and how they've made each other better in the process. The moment, though, is interrupted when those weird ping-pong peacocks clamber aboard a Chrysler TV-8 tank to squawk about Alioth's impending arrival. As the team steels themselves to take on this massive monster, we can see Ronan the Accuser's crashed ship, the Dark Aster, his 3-mile-wide flagship from Guardians of the Galaxy. Loki then pledges to stay behind, with Sylvie giving the tempad to Mobius, who in turn takes a page out of Loki's book in episode 1 by pledging to burn the TVA to the ground.
I'm gonna burn this place to the ground.
Burn it to the ground!
Kid Loki gives Loki a golden sword like the kind he wields in Agent of Asgard. Loki and Mobius share a well-deserved hug, and then it's game time for our heroes. As Alioth sweeps forward, we see the head of a massive statue of the Living Tribunal, the three-faced cosmic being that first appeared in 1967's Strange Tales 157. The Living Tribunal maintains balance in the multiverse and was also invoked by name way back in Doctor Strange. Baron Mordo wields the staff of the Living Tribunal to train Doctor Strange. It's that long staff that turns into like a 3-section staff or chain whip made of pure energy. Behind classic Loki and in the upcoming shots, we can see the ruins of a SHIELD helicarrier as well, potentially with a Hydra logo on it too. Anyway, without a branch timeline in sight to attract Alioth, it's up to Loki to create a distraction in flaming sword form. But unfortunately, Alioth isn't buying it, and he's about to chomp Sylvie to death when classic Loki shows up and reveals just how powerful he is. He conjures a massive, full-scale illusion of Asgard from thin air that's serving some major Wizard of Oz realness. His gambit buys Loki and Sylvie just enough time, and his glorious purpose fulfilled, he dies laughing. Together, Loki and Sylvie combine their powers to enchant Alioth just before certain death. Taking control over this gaseous guard dog, Loki opens his eyes to see the clouds parting to reveal that giant castle with the glowing tower from Sylvie's vision earlier in the episode. Anyway, the sky behind it looks like this blend between the Bifrost and the Quantum Realm, and it is a mystery into which our heroes must journey without hesitation. What will they find there? Well, I, for one, cannot wait to find out. I said... I know. Look, even if we wind up getting Ralph Bonered here, I regret absolutely nothing, and neither should you. Anyway, folks, there you have it. That is everything we spotted in Loki Episode 5 Journey into Mystery. With just one episode to go, we still have so many questions and even more theories about how all this could end next week. In the meantime, though, we'll keep you updated with theories, deep dives, and other MCU analysis over on Nerdist.com. But first, tell us, what do you think of Loki Episode 5? Did you spot anything that we missed? And who do you think is in that mysterious castle mansion anyway?
Yeah, baby! Yeah!
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com. Here's everything you might have missed in the Loki finale. All good things must come to an end, and Loki was one extremely good thing. Over the course of 6 episodes, we saw new sides of the God of Mischief as he explored the bureaucratic nightmare that is the Time Variance Authority, the emotional nightmare that is confronting one's inner demons, and the ineluctable nightmare that is learning your best friend could have been riding a sweet-ass jet ski this entire time.
It'll be fun, though.
Yeah, it'll be really fun.
After conquering the gaseous murder monster Alioth and wandering beyond the void to the edges of time and space as we know them, Loki and Sylvie journeyed into mystery. In episode 6, titled For All Time Always, we had a truly epic conclusion to this weird and wonderful journey we've been on. With mind-bending conversations, timeline trickery, and shocking reveals, it was a fitting finale for the God of Mischief's Disney Plus series, and sets the stage for so much more MCU goodness to come. And by the way, if you haven't watched that mid-credit scene yet, go do that right now, you mewling quims. Anyway, we turned our finest TVA agents loose on this episode to uncover all the myriad Easter eggs, references, and hidden details that you might have missed. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com, which I will link to in the description below. However, to talk about this episode in detail, we obviously need to spoil what happened, so if you haven't watched it yet or you accidentally clicked this video because an older boy dared you to, leave now before someone kicks this door wide open. Okie dokie, folks, let's get into it, shall we? Now let me start off by saying one thing. We motherfucking call that shit, baby! Kang Watch! Kang Watch! Let's f***ing go! Kang Watch! What's good? Kang Watch. Excuse me. What I meant to say is our Kang Watch has officially begun in earnest, because after Loki episode 6, we need to watch over our shoulders for Kangs coming out of the woodwork. I'm talking Iron Lad, Immortus, Rama-Tut, the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, you name it, they're coming. Because after the Loki finale, the multiverse of madness is officially upon us, and all hell is about to break loose in the MCU. And now, for those who don't know, allow me to explain what I mean when I talk about Kang and Kang Watch. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Kang the Conqueror is one of the greatest villains in Marvel Comics history. Most frequently, he fights with the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. First appearing in 1963's Fantastic Four 19 as the ancient Egyptian ruler Rama-Tut, and in 1964's Avengers number 8 as the green and purple madman Kang, he's a time-traveling tyrant from the 31st century named Nathaniel Richards. He's appeared in many different variations over the years: Rama-Tut, Immortus, Kang the Conqueror, Iron Lad, Scarlet Centurion, the list goes on and on. And while these variants are all different, they largely share one commonality. They seek to establish order in the universe, typically by establishing Kang as the ruler of all reality by conquering each and every timeline in the multiverse. You know, basically exactly what the TVA's been doing this entire time. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start back at the beginning. During the opening credits, we hear these sweet strains of the Harry James recording of It's Been a Long, Long Time. It's the song that Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter finally get to dance to in Avengers Endgame, some 70 years after the events of Captain America: The First Avenger. And it's a moment that served as a fitting capstone for the time-traveling antics of the Infinity Saga, but here it's a prelude to pandemonium, because we then hear a cavalcade of different songs, radio frequencies, and familiar voices, both real and fictional, as the episode opens with a wild sequence that has shades of the magical mystery tour from Doctor Strange and the opening of Contact. Sam Wilson eggs on Scott Lang in Civil War, Hope Van Dyne says that's how you punch from Ant-Man, Black Panther utters his immortal Wakanda forever, and so on and so forth as we hear iconic line from our favorite characters. Next, we hear an excerpt from Alan Watts' Mystery of Time lecture as we zoom away from the sun out of a galaxy. We also hear Neil Armstrong's One Small Step for Man adage and Greta Thunberg's Denver University climate change rallying cry of how dare they as the music warps in the background. We then witness a Big Bang-style event, the creation of a new universe, or in this case, universes. As it explodes, we hear Malala Yousafzai and Nelson Mandela offering us hope for the future, and classic Loki shouting glorious purpose like he did in episode 5 when facing down Goliath. We see not one, but two different universes here. Maybe it's the MCU and the SPUMC, the Sony Pictures universe of Marvel characters. Or maybe it's even the old Fox Marvel universe. Who knows? As we continue soaring, we hear Vision's infamous WandaVision line, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" followed by Maya Angelou. We then travel through a blue and white tunnel that we soon realize to be the time stream itself, before Sylvie brings Loki and us as the viewer back to reality with a simple "open your eyes." As the sound fades away, we emerge on a circular asteroid with a mysterious mansion seated atop it. The front entrance to this building is flanked by twin pillars emblazoned with hourglasses, and the building itself is black, fractured with these bright golden lines of energy. It gives the sense that this place could tear apart at any moment, and it evokes the Japanese art form of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with golden lacquer to highlight imperfections. Sylvie and Loki stand on the precipice of the building, and for once, they're both too nervous to act. For Sylvie, it's kind of like the case of a dog that finally catches a car and just doesn't know what to do with it.
It's just you know.
Okay, shut up.
Time waits for no man, though, and especially not for two gods of mischief. The door swings open, and they're greeted by everyone's favorite anthropomorphic clock / my sleep paralysis demon, Miss Minutes.
Hey, y'all!
They're standing in an antechamber filled with two massive statues, and at first glance, these cloaked figures do evoke Doctor Doom, but they're really just sleeker versions of Kang the Conqueror, as we'll soon see. In a close-up shot, it looks like the statues have clocks for faces underneath their hoods, holding what appears to be a model of the building in their hands. I'm a little unclear what they're actually holding. If you know, let me know in the comments below. Now, Miss Minutes reveals they are actually in the Citadel at the end of time, summoned by He Who Remains. First appearing in 1976's Thor number 245, He Who Remains was the final director of the Time Variance Authority who dwelled within the Citadel at the end of time, a fortress in the last surviving reality of the multiverse, kinda like what we see here. Now, he originally created the Time Twisters, a trio of beings intended to survive the end of the universe and go on to impart their wisdom to the next cycle of life. But they were born flawed and traveled back in time with destruction on their mind. So after Thor, Jane Foster, and the Warriors 3 stopped these corrupted creations, He Who Remains then created the Time Keepers instead. Now, in the comics, it's important to note He Who Remains is not the same character as Kang the Conqueror. But as we'll soon see, He Who Remains here is a variant of Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors. But before we get there, Miss Minutes makes our Lokis an awfully tempting offer, one which will ultimately tear them apart, it seems. Miss Minutes offers to reinsert both Loki and Sylvie back into the timeline in exchange for leaving He Who Remains well enough alone. She offers to let Loki not only win the Battle of New York, but kill Thanos and sit on the throne of Asgard as well. So maybe that's where those unused trailer shots of King Loki and the throne of Asgard and Loki standing in Stark Tower were from. Mark Mothersbaugh's Twilight of the Gods from Thor Ragnarok plays in the background as Loki seriously considers getting everything he ever wanted. And although this offer is tempting, neither Sylvie nor Loki are willing to reject the notion of free will in exchange for some cosmic bribe. Meanwhile, back at the TVA, Ravonna Renslayer frantically looks through files and wistfully looks at the rings left behind by Mobius. Miss Minute shows up and apologizes for taking her sweet time now, y'all, and that cagey little clock doesn't give Ravonna the files she actually asked for about the creation of the TVA. Rather, she gives her files that He Who Remains thinks will be more up her alley.
Happy reading.
Meanwhile, in the Citadel, Loki and Sylvie enter another chamber in this twisted mashup of Final Fantasy VII's Nibelheim Mansion and Ultimicia's castle from Final Fantasy VIII. At least that's what I saw. The floor itself is emblazoned with the cycles of the moon and the motions of the planets. It's another reference to keeping time. Beneath the gears of a giant clock overhead, we see 4 statues. 3 of them intact are statues of the timekeepers we previously met in animatronic form, but the 4th one shattered on the floor is actually a subtle reference to the Oracle of Siwa, the secret 4th timekeeper banished to ancient Egypt by He Who Remains. As depicted in the 2005 Fantastic Four comic 4, number 16, the Oracle helps the Fantastic Four fight against not Kang, but rather Kang's son, Ramades, who he had during his time in ancient Egypt as the ruler Rama-Tut. And if that sounds confusing, and needlessly so, don't worry, because it is. It probably won't come into play at all, but if it does, it won't be until Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania at the absolute earliest, so don't sweat it, plenty of time to unpack this particular clue later. Finally, our host makes his triumphant appearance from an elevator, and it's Jonathan Majors looking dapper as hell in a casual version of Kang's purple and green costume from the comics, mixed with his old school getup as Immortus, including that golden medallion right there on his chest. And honestly, I've got to admit, it also kind of evokes Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness from Skyrim, but I know that's not what they're going for here. Anyway, He Who Remains, or Kang as I'll probably just keep calling him, is holding an apple. And this really hammers home that whole Garden of Eden biblical parallel that's going on here. He's tantalizing our heroes with the forbidden fruit of an offer they can't refuse. Also, it parallels Doctor Strange, in which they used an apple to experiment with temporal powers. Now, He Who Remains also thinks it's kinda silly and just a little bit creepy that Miss Minute still calls him He Who Remains, giving us the sense of just how long he's actually been here. He remains unfazed even in the face of Sylvie trying to murk him repeatedly inside the elevator. Using a highly advanced tempad, he teleports around, thwarting her every strike. Inside Kang's weirdly parallel inner sanctum, we see many fine leather-bound books, dueling fireplaces, and a chalkboard containing a number of complex mathematical theorems, likely pertaining to quantum mechanics. Back at the TVA, Mobius confronts Ravonna in her office, and we learn who she really was before she was plucked from the sacred timeline to work at the TVA. That FDR high school pen, sadly not a Molecule Man Easter egg after all. It actually belonged to Ravonna in her real life as the vice principal of FDR High School in Fremont, Ohio, circa 2018. B-15 lures Hunter D-90 and other Minutemen to this timeline where they are forced to face the truth, that Ravonna wasn't always Ravonna. In the background, we can see a degree from The Ohio State University revealing Ravonna's real name is Rebecca Terminette, or Termine. I don't know how she pronounces it because comics. It's a name that she adopted back in Avengers the Terminatrix Objective number 4 to go back in time and live in timely Wisconsin alongside Kang. Back in the Citadel, Kang holds court telling Loki that he's just a flea on the back of a dragon along for an incredible ride over which he has no control. And Kang makes a strong case against free will, arguing that everything that's happened to Loki and Sylvie has been Kang's doing.
I paved the road.
Much like we saw at the TVA in episode 1, he even has printouts of their conversation to prove that he has a record of what will and has happened, which is why Sylvie has such a hard time actually killing him. We get some nice metatextual commentary here about the writing process when Kang teases them about how Loki and Sylvie can't get to the end of their story until they've been changed by the journey. And the banter about free will versus determinism continues back in Ravana's office, with Renslayer arguing that the TVA is a necessary lie to prevent chaos and death from reigning supreme. And for her, the only way to exercise free will is to be in charge, which is a dangerous line of thinking. Mobius, though, throws Ravana's line about being friends across time and allies to the end back in her face, but Ravana argues that Mobius is at fault here, throwing out eons of friendship on a couple of Lokis. And then we see why Mobius is a mere analyst and Ravana was a hunter before she became judge.
Yep, you're right. Back here again.
Whatever Ravana read in those files has clearly radicalized her. When we see her next, I doubt she's still gonna be Ravana Renslayer as we know her. She will pop up again, but probably as her alter ego, the Terminatrix, a woman who seeks to control her own destiny. Someone who's capable of going toe-to-toe with Kang the Conqueror himself. And as demonstrated in the comics, she basically takes over the Avengers and even infiltrates the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, the interdimensional assembly of Kang variants from across the multiverse. So in short, she is not someone to be trifled with. She'll kill you.
Go ahead.
Back in the Citadel, He Who Remains becomes He Who Explains, giving us some much-needed backstory about himself in a roundabout manner. He claims that without him, without the TVA, everything burns. And who would do the burning, you ask? Why, Kang himself, of course! Well, not just any Kang. He alludes to his various identities. Rama-Tut is the ruler, Kang is the conqueror, He Who Remains is his current getup, and Jerk has gotta be Immortus because that's just like a douchey thing to call yourself. I'm Immortus, I live forever. Can't you tell by my name?
Jerk.
In the West Coast Avengers comics, Immortus is the guise under which he manipulated Vision and Scarlet Witch to have twin boys, Billy and Tommy, so he could then harness Wanda's potential as a Nexus being. So basically, Immortus's goal is to ensure that no matter what happens in the multiverse, all Kang variants wind up becoming Immortus, and that seems like it's He Who Remains' goal as well. Now, in my headcanon, this is the Immortus that achieved this goal and now is just exhausted by success, because either way, he wins. Kang gives us a Kangvenient visual aid to explain how this Kangnundrum came to be. A variant of himself lived on Earth in the 31st century, and there he discovered there were parallel universes stacked on top of each other. And soon multiple Kangs were Kangmunicating with each other. We even see two Kangs Kanglaborating on building TemPads and reset charges that will later be used by the TVA. But soon, this narcissistic peace gives way to all-out multiversal war. That's right, folks, the great conflict teased in the TVA's informational video in episode 1 was a battle of the Kangs, a Kang of the Hill, if you will. And speaking of Kangs, those little Kangs we see playing about even seem to be wearing pared-down versions of their battlesuit from the comics, so nice touch there. However, this Kang managed to devise a way to control Alioth, the creature created from tears in reality which Loki and Sylvie bested in episode 5. Capable of consuming time and space itself, Alioth was the perfect weapon for this Kang to use to win the multiversal war. Eventually, he isolated this timeline, the sacred timeline, then created the Time Variant Authority in order to prune the timeline to ensure what he refers to as ages and ages of cosmic harmony.
You're welcome.
While this Kang has plenty of red in his ledger, he points out that he's the only one keeping the sacred timeline safe from his variants. He teases a number of evil Kangs to come in future outings like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And then Kang gives Loki and Sylvie a brutal choice.
You kill me and destroy all this, and you don't just have one devil, you have an infinite amount. Or you two run the thing.
So is Kang lying? Is he telling the truth? Is he trying to make a desperate bid for power? Or is he simply just having a grim bit of fun with these two gods of mischief? Do you choose potentially infinite devils in exchange for free will, or sacrifice choice for a lifetime of safety and convenience? It's a morally gray situation in which there are no real winners or losers, just survivors that have to live with their choices and the consequences. When Sylvie tries to take the high road, Kang gives her a reality check reminding her and Loki they're all villains here. They've all done terrible, horrible, horrific things. And while this conversation is happening, Loki and Sylvie are framed as opposites. They are alike in every way while being polar opposites. Sylvie dressed in all black down to her dagger, Loki dressed in white with a golden blade, each leaning in a mirrored pose. It's like having a little angel and devil on your shoulder, except in this case, the person making the choice is deciding if they'd rather just keep going to work forever or die instead, proving that this Kang is canonically a millennial.
I'm tired.
The conversation then takes a turn as we hear a strange rumbling in the background. Kang reveals that this marks a threshold, a point of no return, where he no longer knows what will happen next. It turns out he didn't know how everything would go, just most things.
I flipped earlier when I said I know how everything is going to go.
Out the window, we see new branch timelines beginning to form in the absence of the TVA actively pruning them. And Kang, though, is sitting pretty because he's convinced that no matter what happens, he'll just end up right back here where he started.
Reincarnation, baby.
What follows is an all-out fight between Loki and Sylvie, with Kang happily watching in the background. Sylvie leaps to attack Kang, but Loki stops her, urging caution against accidentally starting a new multiversal war. And during this heartfelt yet heated mid-combat conversation, we see that Loki has been changed by the journey, whereas Sylvie cannot put aside her deep-seated convictions to put an end to the TVA once and for all. Things, though, come to a head when Loki interrupts Sylvie's slow-motion death blow on Kang by putting himself at her mercy. He confesses that he doesn't want a throne, he doesn't want to win, he just wants her to be okay. And then, at long last, Sylvie and Loki finally smooch. Although the kiss was likely genuine and Loki has learned to love himself in the most literal way possible, Sylvie used it as a feint, telling Loki, "But I'm not you." She yeets him through a time door back to the TVA using Kang's tempad. And then Sylvie turns he who remains into he who until recently remained. With a cryptic "see you soon," Kang perishes and Sylvie collapses in a heap on the floor. Her mission finally over, she must now live with the consequences of whatever comes next, which, as we'll see, is the birth of a full-blown multiverse. Back at the TVA, the timeline is going positively bazoinkers with new branch timelines as Mobius and B-15 acknowledge there's no more turning back. They share one last for all time, always, as we catch up with a battered, bruised, emotionally ravaged Loki. Although he's right back where he started, this is a very different Loki, one who's not destined to cause pain and suffering. Rather, he truly is the superior Loki, especially compared to the one with whom we started this show. Refusing to give up, Loki steals himself and runs off to find Mobius and B-15, who are worriedly talking about 63 new branch timelines. Now that number could be random, but it does feel like a nod to the year 1963, in which the Avengers first debuted in Marvel Comics in a battle against the God of Mischief himself. Now Loki tries to explain what's going on here, only to discover something horrible. They have no idea who he is.
What?
Meanwhile, the statues of the Timekeepers in the Time Variance Authority lobby, they're gone.
What?
They've been replaced by a singular statue of Kang in his comic book regalia. The damage has already been done. The Kangs are coming and multiversal war is inevitable.
What?
Thankfully, though, this is not the last time we're going to see Loki. As confirmed by the mid-credit scene, the God of Mischief will return in Loki Season 2 at a to-be-determined date, and potentially in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness as well, at least according to The Hollywood Reporter. Regardless, Loki is officially the first Marvel Disney Plus series to be renewed for a second season, and I, for one, can't wait to see what they have in store. In the meantime, though, Loki and the rest of the MCU have to contend with a newly unleashed multiverse full of Kang variants and other surprises that we'll surely see pop up in animated series like What If, and films like Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. As for what this could all be leading towards, well, the very mention of multiversal war immediately evokes Secret Wars. The 2015 Secret Wars storyline involved multiple realities crashing in upon one another until each universe's planet Earth was combined into this surreal interdimensional pocket reality called Battleworld. Considering it's the one story the Russo brothers have gone on record saying they would return to the Marvel Cinematic Universe to direct, it seems likely that Marvel's multiversal story arc could culminate with this tale of interdimensional Game of Thrones. But as always, only time and Miss Minutes will tell.
Hey y'all!
And that is everything we spotted in the Loki finale. Folks, it was a fantastic ending to one of my favorite MCU entries to date. And while it answered many questions, it also gave us some ideas and theories about how Loki could affect upcoming MCU entries as well. And we'll share those with you in the days ahead on Nerdist.com. In the meantime, though, tell us, what did you think of the Loki finale? Did you spot anything that we missed? And what do you want to see from a season 2?
What?
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.